The girl leaned over to someone softly talking about how a girl in an alley not far away seemed to be in danger. The policeman, who was sitting behind the wheel of the car, with his partner next to him in the front seat, replied with a smile on his face that they would be at that location soon. The girl stepped away from their car, turning around to make sure there was no trace of her. The policeman immediately became serious, and didn't seem like he was going to ride to the rescue. He immediately took the wheel, saying that the workday was over. His partner pointed to a small group of people that was visible from the side window of the car and asked if this was the girl they had just been told about. She said she needed help because she was being harassed by 4 guys. The policeman grudgingly asked what it was for. The girl looked at him with incomprehension. He shifted his gaze to her, asked if she had seen their ringleader, implying that they couldn't handle them. Said there were too many of them and the 2 of them wouldn't do anything to them. The guys watched as their ringleader touched the girl, who tried to get his hands off her face. The policeman answered him that in this case they should call for help. The guy, who was standing with a cigarette in his mouth, looked at the girl with a smirk. The policeman answered that those guys would play with her and leave her alone. This is not the first time here and nothing to cause unnecessary trouble. While he continued to say his own thing, the policewoman looked out the window as she heard someone yelling to let her go. They both looked through the open window towards the guys with a shocked look. Some guy in a police uniform stood confidently in front of the guys who were harassing the girl. Their chief looked at him, holding the hands of the girl, who was in tears, asked what the fuck was going on. The guy with a threatening look repeated for them to let her go. The man who was holding the girl started laughing at his cocky attitude, let her go, and headed towards the cop. He got too close to him, exhaled smoke from his cigarette at him with a pathetic look, trying to show that he was in charge here, asking what would happen if he didn't want to do it. A sharp blow from the cop to his chin knocked him to the ground, blood spurting from his mouth. He bulged his eyes in pain. The cigarette fell out of his hand. The guy was hit hard, collapsed to the floor screaming, and started clutching his nose with his hands to try to reduce the pain. The cops in the car looked on with an expression of surprise and bewilderment that their partner was able to skillfully stand up for himself and the girl. The guys standing nearby were not happy that the policeman dared to hit their ringleader. The policeman was kneading the hand with which he had struck the blow. He said, if he did not want to solve the situation in a good way, then he would do it in a bad way. The guy slowly got up with a bloody face, not taking his eyes off him despite the shock of the blow. A crowd of guys started running at him with fists. The policeman struck the ringleader again as he was ahead of them all. From the blow, the guy turned his head to the side. Blood spurted from his mouth, which gave the impression of a forceful impact on his side. The policeman coldly glared at him. The policeman watched the situation with shock and concern on their faces. The guy was kneeling on the ground with one hand on his head. His expression showed that he realized his powerlessness in front of the policeman, who stood behind him and looked at him with hatred for his behavior, calling him a scumbag. He carefully slipped his hand into his jacket pocket, pulling out a cold weapon, as he could not do anything with his own strength. The girl, who was standing next to him, covered her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming in fear when she saw him pull out a knife and threaten to kill him. The policeman calmly asked if he had ever killed anyone, as he didn't believe he was capable of it. The guy raised the knife in front of his face and shouted back that he had killed before and he would be next, but the policeman still rejected his answer. The policeman took his hand in which the knife was in, looked him straight in the eyes, and giving a look of fear with his crazy look, said that he had never actually killed a person, as his look was not at all like someone who had committed murder. The guy with an angry expression asked if he doubted his ability to do it. He replied unemotionally that he would have killed him already without talking about it. He approached the boy, took the knife in his hand and pointed it at him, telling him to kill him, thus scaring him more and more. Looking at him with a piercing look, full of tension and cold-bloodedness, he said, "If he can't." The boy looked at him with eyes full of fear. The policeman went on to say with a crazed look that then he would kill him himself. The guy looked at him with an anxious look. He released the knife from his hand out of fear, which fell with the blade downwards, started to step back, his voice shaking, asking who he even was. Thoth put a hand on his shoulder. The police officers continued to watch, waiting to see how events would unfold next. He squeezed his shoulder with his hand, which had veins that spoke of his strong muscles. With a suggestive look of fear, told that he was the one to catch rabble like him. The guy started screaming with words that they were fucking cops. A week ago, at a port called Incheon, there were many containers carrying a variety of goods. Someone was standing at the entrance of one of these containers and his shadow glinted thanks to the sunlight on the iron door. He grasped the pipes with both hands to open it, swung the door open. Inside sat guys who immediately looked in his direction. One of them sat wiping a knife. The guy toppled everyone with a stern look and said that everyone was already there. In front of them stood the killer nicknamed Bright December. One of the guys nicknamed October, who sat wiping the knife clean, asked with a mocking smirk why it was taking so long. A voice came from the end of the container, asked that he only got involved in this because it was his last mission. Bright December told him not to exaggerate since he didn't come late. With a cold stare he asked what their business was. The two boys looked at him with hard stares. October tipped him a sly smile that reflected playfulness and hidden intentions, as from behind the bright October appeared a guy with a chain pointed at him, ready to kill him in cold blood. The chain gripped his throat in an iron grip. Bright December immediately grabbed it with his hand, instantly reacting to the danger. His eyes showed a reflection of fear and bewilderment at the situation. The guy was in the role of an attacker who was trying to wrap an iron weapon around him. He lost his balance with a clumsy fall and dropped to the floor with a loud thud. The metal chain with its surface glistening dangled in the air. Bright December pointed to the chain, which he confidently held in his hand, turned to the others asking what it was. October, followed by his lads with a look devoid of emotion, replied with his sly smile that it was the work of such. The guy, despite the answer provided, repeated the question with misunderstanding. The one replied that it was a mission to eliminate the legendary assassin Bright December, and on his face it was evident that a devious plan was running through his mind. The boys mobbed Bright December into the fray, filling the air with tension. One of them resolutely attacked first, a knife gleaming in his hand, ready for use. But suddenly his face changed from emotions of anger to emotions of surprise and surprise. A chain appeared around his neck, which Bright December managed to hang on faster than he attacked him. He instantly resolved the situation by striking him in the face with his knee while others behind him were ready to strike him back. The next, in a sharp motion, swung his axe, aiming for his head. Bright December saw the blade of the axe flash in front of his face. Immediately reacting to the situation, he swung his foot, pointing it at the side of the offender's neck. From the blow, the guy released the axe from his hands as he lost control of his movements. Suddenly he noticed one of the guys running at him with a knife in his hand. The guy aimed his knife at him, but the Bright December deftly ducked down, avoiding an accurate hit. Using his excellent skills, he quickly got behind the guy and wrapped a chain around his throat, which he himself held crosswise. With a sinister look, the guy clutched the chain around his opponent's throat, conveying a look of ruthless determination. October watched their fight intently. Bright December roughly grabbed the scruff of the beaten guy by the scruff of his neck, who looked at him with a frightened look. Then he ruthlessly let him go to the floor and asked October if he was the one who had recruited such a bunch to kill him. He smiled a little, his smile hiding his deceitful and evil thoughts. He put his hand into the inner pocket of his jacket. With a smile, the guy pointed the gun, adding that he didn't have much respect for them though. He said it was an order from the Bodhisattva, adding that he needed to get rid of the unfit and that he used the gun when he didn't feel like bothering to clean up. After saying that the order was from Bodhisattva, a mad anger at him appeared on Bright December's face. The guy bit his lower lip in anger, his face veins bulging with rage, and said that he had told him this would be his last mission, and then it would all be over. He wondered why. October told him with a sly smile that he should ask him himself in hell. Bright December looked at him with an expression of alarm and consternation in his eyes, as if at that moment he realized the seriousness of the threat. Putting his finger on the trigger of the gun, he told him to buy by calling him by his nickname of Bright December. The guy lunged at him with an attempt to avoid the shot, showing determination and desperation at the same time. Sudden splatters of blood flew against the red wall. A light smoke hovered in the room, creating harmony. In front of the Buddha statue, a man in a red kimono sat on the floor. In front of him stood a vat containing incense that emitted a light smoke. In the middle of the vat, between the incense, there was a picture of a guy in a red kimono with an umbrella in his hand. The man pulled out his cell phone, which was ringing. He picked up the phone and asked if everything was ready, and the back of the phone confirmed his words by saying that everything was done. The man took the phone away from his ear and looked at the screen with a look full of questions. October lay lifelessly on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood and his gun beside him. Bright December looked down at his dead body with a devastated look. Near his ear he also held his phone with a piece of shit talking into the receiver. The man immediately recognized him by his voice and questioningly called him by his nickname to make sure it was him. He looked at the picture and said he was just about to light 49 incense, asked how he had learned of this ancient ritual and called him. Bright December, without answering his question, asked if he was in the temple now. The man, without getting an answer to his question, said that the monk was there and should be. He asked Bright December if he could get up, implying that he was unsure of his abilities, as there were many different people with knives at the entrance to the night temple. The boy confidently told him that he could open the door as he was behind it. He stood in front of the crowded crowd of people with weapons, expressing readiness for a fight, holding his cell phone near his ear and saying that he was on his way to the door. He threw the phone on the floor with a confident gaze directed at the battle-ready crowd, saying that if the monk didn't come, he would open the door himself. The eyes of the people, their faces showing their readiness to kill, looked in his direction. A guy in a shirt that fitted his strong and pumped-up body stood in front of the killer Bright December and told him that the Bodhisattva was now preparing for the ritual. The guy lowered his head and answered him that fuck this Bodhisattva. He raised his eyes at him and said that he was stealing children and turning them into a murderer, whereas someone who makes money from murders can be called a deity. The boy only mumbled at his words, his eyes filled with pity and guilt for doing nothing in spite of him. He drew his axe in his hand. Suddenly, with furious rage in his eyes, he raised the axe and pointed it at Bright December with a threatening gesture. Bright December once again skillfully dodged the blow by crouching down with a quick reaction and moving towards him to strike. After remembering these moments, he was filled with anger and a desire for revenge. He shouted loudly to the crowd of people who stood in front of the temple to move, calling them scum, thinking that he had been trained to kill since childhood. He lunged at the people with a great desire to take their lives here and now expressing his anger at them, going on about how he had given up everything for the monk. With a cold-blooded stare he stabbed one of them in the stomach, scrolling through his thoughts that he had given up on himself as well. Slit the throat of the other. He'd given up his life as well, and even his family, as suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his back. He was stabbed in the back, blood splattering to the sides. He turned back with a shocked look with the knife in his back. He saw the girl who looked like she didn't expect such actions from herself. He was even more angry, and screaming with anger, he ran at the others to finish them off. He knelt on his knees with a haggard look, with bloody clothes and wounds, in front of the gun pointed at him. Even now the monk wanted to take his life. The monk looked at him mercilessly. The guy with hopeful understanding reminded him that he had promised him something. Kneeling continued that he had promised him to let him live an ordinary life. The monk listened to the guy with an indifferent expression, that after this mission he would be able to live like a normal person. With a gun held to his forehead, he shouted that he had even sworn to him to do so. The monk answered him that he was now living a normal life, to which the guy asked in incomprehension what he meant. He tilted his head to him without removing the gun and said that every ordinary person sooner or later faces death, with a smirk on his face, as if there was nothing to be done about it. He said that such were the laws of life. Bright December froze in tense expectation, anticipating that the next moments could be the last. The boy addressed him by name with confidence, said that he would still take revenge, as if promising to return in the future even from the bowels of hell. His hand lay in a pool of blood betraying no sign that the man was alive. When he woke up, he saw the blurry shapes of a group of people trying to bring him to his senses. Coming out of the state of semi-consciousness, he clearly saw in front of him two guys and a girl in police uniform. He immediately exclaimed that they were cops. The girl asked him what was wrong with him, and her partner emotionlessly replied that according to the doctor he might have short-term memory loss. The girl called his name Kim Kyungsoo and shouted at him in an attempt to get through to him so that he would come to his senses, to which the guy asked who Kim Kyungsoo was. She shouted back that she was talking about him. The guy standing next to her handed him his ID card and gave him a small round mirror to look at himself. The Ilsan police station, where people sat waiting for their problem to be solved. On the wall hung pictures of police officers who worked in this police station. On one of them, Kim Kyungsoo was smiling with a kind expression. He worked here as a police officer, but he was also a cold-blooded killer nicknamed Bright December. The guy looked at himself and his ID, checking his own face, and was shocked. He couldn't believe his eyes that it was him. In his head came the realization that he had woken up after death, as if his essence had regained its existence. On his face was bewilderment and shock at what was happening after realizing that he was now a police officer. Legendary assassin, Bright December, after being betrayed by his organization, reborn in the body of a policeman with two flowers on his epaulets, and instead of committing revenge, immediately, a slap on the cheek came to him. Two of his work partners stood in front of him, one of whom was venting his displeasure towards Kyungsoo, calling him a jerk. The girl in police uniform was on the floor upside down, which meant they were trying to torture her that way, while the policeman was trying to tell something to Kyungsoo, who threw a serious look at the girl. Kim Kyungsoo looked at himself in the mirror and couldn't believe that the idiot who was reflected in the mirror was him. As he looked in the mirror, he asked the police officers in bewilderment if he had tried to commit suicide. A girl in a police uniform yelled at him and said that no matter how hard it was, you can't do that. To which one of the policemen soothingly said that it was good that the rope broke then, which caused Kyungsoo to stay in the hospital for a week. The policewoman angrily yelled at him and told him he was a fool for going to do that and was one step away from death. She shouted, asking if he could change anything by writing down the names of these scumbags. The guy didn't understand and asked what she was talking about, to which the girl lowered her head, still disgruntled, and told him that she was talking about his suicide note. She said with a raised tone of voice that he left the names of the senior officers there in the note. Had words like, "I suffered being a police officer." The worst was from Hwang Jongmin and Hwang Jongchan. Those jerks. The guys in police uniforms were Senior Patrolman Hwang Jongmin and Hwang Jongchan. Hwang Jongmin asked what was wrong with these rookies. Jongmin turned with a hint of frustration and misunderstanding, asking what was wrong with these rookies. Jongmin pointed his finger at Kyungsoo with the statement that his parents were criminals who committed suicide after committing suicide. Jongchan exhaled heavily, asking with a frustrated look that he wanted to go after his parents. The son of criminals turned officer. Jongmin said with a penetrating look, if she was going to say goodbye to her life, she should have done it in silence. Chongmi swung at him and was ready to punch him, questioning why he had written down their names in the first place. Outside the gray police station building, something was happening. Just as suddenly, Jongmin's face changed from a confident one who was about to strike to a surprised one who didn't seem to expect Kyungsoo's next actions. Kyungsoo instantly grabbed his arm to prevent him from striking. Jongmin looked at him, not expecting him to do that, and said he was crazy. Kyungsoo looked at him with a passive look as he rudely asked how dare he oppose him. Jongchan called out to Jenshu, who was lying on the ground with her head down at the time, and responded to him as sir with a tense look. Despite being forced into that position, he asked her if it could be counted as an attempted assassination of a superior. The girl was bent over with her head down, so trying to look in their direction replied that she couldn't see anything. Jongchan crouched down beside the girl with a look of pathos as if he was above them here. He took a strand of her hair, which scared the girl as she didn't know what to expect from him next. He said he would help her stand up, but before he could do that, he was distracted by Kyungsoo's voice calling them assholes. Hwang Jongchan turned to him unhappily, still holding a strand of hair in his hand. Kyungsoo, showing with his look that they were acting like fools, asked what kind of mess they were making. Jongmin was furious, asking what he was saying, as Kyungsoo suddenly sharply squeezed his hand harder that he started screaming in terrible pain. He didn't even think of letting him go even though he was squirming in pain. Jongchan and Jenshu looked on in bewilderment and at the same time alarmed that Kyungsoo was able to bring physical pain to Jongmin. Jongmin asked to let him go, grabbing Kyungsoo's hand to try and remove it. Kim Kyungsoo pointed two fingers of his other hand in his direction. He stabbed them into the side of the guy's neck, preventing him from getting out of pain. Jongmin rolled his eyes upwards, his gaze losing focus of attention. Kyungsoo abruptly let go of him and he started falling so that his cap flew off of him, while Jongchan and Jenshu were dumbfounded by what was happening. Jongchan turned to him with panic, asking him what was wrong. Jongmin directed his eyes upward with consternation. Before he could realize the situation, he saw that Kyungsoo standing above him had raised his foot with a vengeful look, which meant that he was about to step on him. The guys watched with shocked faces, taking in what was happening. Kyungsoo stepped on Jongchan between his legs. He cried out in so much pain that he even had tears in his eyes. His partners looked at everything with fear and pity that he was being hurt like that. Kyungsoo looked coldly and without pity at the guys he had just beaten up justly, while the guys were in a panic. Jenshu pointed her finger at him and called him a murderer, her voice sounding anxious. Kyungsoo threw a slightly confused look in her direction. Senior Officer Choi Jin-ha, who was seething with anger at their behavior, appeared in front of them and ordered them all to disperse. He asked Kyungsoo why he raised his hand to his fellow officer and even hit the older man. Hwang Jongmin shouted for him to be let go, while Cho Chang asked not to be let go because he was afraid it would happen again. Ji-ha pounded his fist on the table and shouted and told Kyungsoo that he thought the officer couldn't be fired. He said that he would personally handle the matter of his dismissal and yelled at him to get away, to which Kyungsoo didn't react in any way, and it was obvious from his look that he mostly didn't care about what he said. The pink cloud slowly floated away, dissolving into a beautiful sunset. Kyungsoo sat down on a bench outside, smacking, taking off his officer's cap and going over it in his hands, contemplating the situation. Said these pigs are a bunch of shit, while meanwhile nearby, a mom was talking to her daughter, who was thrilled to see the police officer himself sitting in front of her. A focused look flashed in his eyes. In the police station building, someone shouted Kyungsoo's name loudly for attention. Jongchan and Jongmin followed Kyungsoo up the stairs, while Jenshu shouted the loudest that Kyungsoo was crazy, to which he said in a calm voice without panic that it was just self-defense. Jongchan turned to him and asked if he had forgotten that they were covered by Senior General, to which he repeated his word Senior General with a question. Jongchan looked confidently and confirmed his question, saying he had a whole Manhwa flower. The three of them waved at Kyungsoo with a smile and told him to be careful on his way home and that they would miss him, to which Kyungsoo didn't react in any way other than silence. Kyungsoo sat on a bench and rested. He realized why they couldn't catch them, assuming everyone there was rotten inside. They have a supervisor, a whole Manhwa. It's kind of like a 1-star in the army. He said that he would rather be reborn in the body of a pig than someone higher in rank because he was a loser anyway. These words were heard by a girl and her mom who were nearby. The girl asked her mom what kind of pig she was talking about. Her mom looked at the girl awkwardly and didn't know what to say. Kyungsoo looked at his policeman cap he was holding in his hand. With a calm look, he said, "At least." A little boy stood in the rain wearing a t-shirt and pants. His eyes were filled with sadness as someone approached him. He looked at this person curiously. A man's hand reached in his direction. The monk looked at him with a frown and asked the boy if he would go with him. The little boy looked at him with a surprised, but hopeful that this was a good man. Look, now it is no longer the little boy, but the killer, cold-blooded Bright December. He is no longer different from the other killers. He has become just like them. Someone behind him called his name Bi Gwan. He turned his cold gaze on that person. His gaze was frozen, full of anxiety and fear. His eyes reflected the muzzle of a gun pointed at him. The muzzle of the gun was cold and metallic, reflecting the danger. The monk looked at him with a sly smile, showing a gesture of farewell by placing one palm upwards in front of him with the words "MANHUA medable." A shot came from the gun accompanied by a sharp sound. The rope was carefully tied in a noose that was designed to commit suicide. It was reflected in Bi Gwan's frightened eyes. The doors were wide open, with bright daylight shining from the street. He took the noose in his hands and regretfully said the name of Kyungsoo, in whose body he found himself. On a table nearby lay a book signed as an introduction to police work. Kyungsoo had been left behind by his parents, a photo of whom stood on his desk at work when he was still a schoolboy. He picked up the photo, which reminded him of the past life of a guy who experiences the betrayal of the collective and settles the score with his life. He looked at the photo and said with a slight pleasure that he liked it as he was in a similar situation. He looked around the side of the room wondering if it was worth starting. The tall building whose windows were filled with light from across the night sky was Jeonji-do, the Western Police Station. On the shoulder of a policeman were epaulets on which 2 stars could be seen. It was Senior General Hong Jun sitting there, immersed in his work. On his tablet screen, he was reading information about Hwaguksa Temple. Suddenly, a closed sign appeared. Hojin heard someone behind him say "Long time no see," and then a look of surprise appeared on his face. Behind him was a person whose face couldn't be seen because of the mask and hood on his head. He asked Hong Jun how he was doing, instilling fear and panic from the unknown person. He turned his head slightly in his direction and cautiously asked what was wrong. He saw that a pen had been put to his throat in a sharp motion. There was fear on his face that this man might go to extremes now, but he told him that he needed to talk, thus threatening him with death if he didn't listen to him. Jung Jun asked who he was with a look of horror, to which the guy with bright aggression in his eyes replied that he was Bright December. They were in the general's office. There was a cup of stationery on the desk. Hong Jun crossed his arms on his chest and said with denial on his face that it was nonsense. Hong Jong asked Bright December, who was sitting across from him. His nickname clarified that according to him he was killed and reborn in the body of an officer, and said with disbelief in his story that no one would believe this nonsense. Bright December replied that he did not ask to believe him. The general looked at him with disbelief, raising his eyebrows skeptically and fixing his gaze on his interlocutor. He said with a smile on his face that there was a threat. Hong Jong looked at him with a serious face. The guy addressed him as a general, extending his hands from his sweater pockets, said he would help them get rid of the Hwaguksa temple, which only had people with bad intentions. Jong Jun was surprised by his statement. The guy calmly looked at him expecting a positive answer. The general looked at him with an insistent look and asked who he was again in a rough voice. The guy asked if he didn't introduce himself. The general at this time had a walkie-talkie in his hand under the table, said he didn't think it was worth discussing the temple of Hwaguksa here, while quietly pressing a button on the radio trying not to attract the guy's attention. Suddenly it beeped from under the table, something the general certainly didn't expect. The guy realized what he was doing and turned to him while he tried to turn it off somehow. He repeated what he'd already told him, that he wasn't asking for a favor. The general was a little startled at his confident words. There was an unconscious policeman on the floor near the wall of policemen. Another policeman was lying face down on the floor also with no indication that he was in his senses. There were many policemen lying on the floor in the corridor, who had probably been killed so as not to interfere with Bright December's work, for which he had handled them himself. Bright December reiterated to him that he was threatening him, his words soaked with aggression and his gaze filled with wariness. The general looked at him with fear and concern. The general looked at him with incomprehension. He confidently asked who he was, to which the guy with a crazy look, as if there was no fear in them, said that he was a Bright December. The general got up from his chair and approached the guy. He started shouting for him to stop all this. The guy with a calm face said that 3 years ago he promised him. Their gazes came closer together. 3 years ago, Hong Jong was sitting on the floor outside in the rain with a tired look like he didn't know what to do next. With one hand he was holding onto his shoulder which was completely covered in blood. Some guy under an umbrella with water pouring out of it seemed to recognize him and said his name questioningly. In front of him was a guy wearing a mask. He introduced himself as Bright December. Jong Jun looked at him and said in surprise that it couldn't be the one from Hwaguksa temple. Bright December said that he had heard that they had been chasing the monk for quite some time. The guy replied that he was the first to get so close and that the monk had asked him to send his congratulations. The guy pressed the button of the umbrella to close it. A sharp tip protruded from the top of the umbrella. The guy threateningly pointed the sharp end of the umbrella to the throat of the general, who had a look of fear on his face, and said that the monk also asked him to tell him that he was not interested in an old man like Jong Jun. Jong Jun sat by the trash can and with a pitiful look asked the guy to spare him. The guy asked that he wanted to die. The general's look was haggard and spoke for itself. He started to take off his mask and addressed him by name. After removing his mask, he approached him with a cold expression on his face. With words to promise him something, he said that he would keep him alive. But then Hong Jong would catch the slippery bastard and give him 3 life sentences, as this freak must pay back. He reacted to his words with a bit of a panicked look. Hong Jong asked why. They were from the same clan. The guy asked if he liked monks, and he looked at him in confusion. He put the mask back on his face and said that he hated monks. The guy standing across from the general hiding from the cold rain under an umbrella added that they were bald downers. Back from the past to the present, they are sitting in the general's office again. The Bright December told him that he had made him a promise that night but didn't seem to keep it. The boy looked at him focusing on a certain thing. The general looked at him with a worried look while the guy noticed his 2 stars on his epaulets and said surprised that he had managed to get promoted in 3 years. He was probably more interested in his own promotion than in keeping his promise. The guy said that was not a good thing to do and slipped his hand into his pocket trying to get something out. He pulled a pen out of his pocket and, remembering himself as an assassin in a past incarnation, firmly told him to die. Fear appeared in the general's eyes as he realized that this man was capable of such actions. Bright December already began to approach him to pay for his unfulfilled promises, but he tried to get out of the situation unharmed and began to say that he did not want this to happen, and that he simply could not do it. The guy stared at him, listening to his side of the story. The general asked why he thought he promoted, reasoning that it was much easier to gather information from the top. Gesturing with his hands, he tried to explain himself. The stone-faced general stood in his office. Someone who was nearby was looking for information about the assassin clan. This person was holding the information about them that he had just found. 3 stars were attached to his epaulets, signifying a higher job status. There were several other partners in the office, one of whom asked about Monk Yuhua, if he was the head of the assassin clan. The general pointed his pointer at Monk Yuhui's photo and said loudly that it was him. The police officers who were sitting at the table listening to him started laughing. They turned to Officer Ho Jung and mockingly said that he had read comic books and that Hwaguksa Temple was a national cultural treasure. Jong Jun raised his voice and tried to prove to them that their department had investigated and found a lot. But suddenly someone interrupted him. A kind of fear and worry appeared in Jong Jun's eyes. He looked at the man's epaulets. There were 4 stars on his epaulets. A voice from the back of the office told him that if he didn't stop now, he would be fired. The man sat with his hands folded on his desk, power and confidence evident in his gaze. Jong Jun froze in place. He was concerned at his words. He told him in a calm voice that he shouldn't get involved in religion. In the general's office, he pronounced that the investigation was stopped after that. Bright December interjected that it had been stopped by the leadership, to which Hong Jong, who was walking around the office, said that was exactly what it was. He put a folder of documents on the desk and said to take a look. It was information that his team had been collecting tirelessly. The guy took it and started reading, carefully studying the information. He threw the documents back on the table, making a pop, rolled over on the back of the couch and said that of course such a messy investigation would be suspended. But he said that there was still valuable information here. The general looked at him with a look of displeasure for not being satisfied with the information they were having such a hard time getting. The guy said so be it. He would keep him alive for now. The general exhaled in relief that he was able to change his mind. The guy asked the officer in surprise why the officer exhaled. He gave him another threatening look in his eyes and reminded him that it was for now. The general looked at him and realized that his business with him was not over. The guy immediately relaxed and put his hand on the armrest, said he was going to help them not die at his own hands. He put his hand to his temple like police officers do and said he hoped they would get along. Calling him LT, Colonel, Jung Joon looked at him questioningly. There was a small sparrow sitting on a branch of pine needles. From behind the sunlight, the Ilsan police station could be seen. At the tables next to each other sat two policemen, a guy and a girl. Suddenly someone opened the door sharply with his foot and a loud sound was heard. The policemen were puzzled by what was happening and were trying to figure out who was behind the open door. It was Kyungsoo, who addressed them with a confident voice. He greeted them and wished them a good morning. Jen Chu waved her hands in frustration and asked what he was doing, if he hadn't been fired. Suddenly, a policeman ran out of the office and started shouting angrily, asking what was going on. He looked at Kyungsoo in bewilderment as he didn't expect to see him here. The latter looked at him with a passive look. He went towards him saying he was a jerk and didn't he tell him not to come back here again. Kyungsoo just asked where the senior officers were, to which the policeman said they were on sick leave. Being furious, he gritted his teeth and told him to get out of here. Kyungsoo looked at him with a calm gaze. Someone appeared behind him. The policemen who were standing in front saw him and didn't immediately realize the purpose of his presence. The policeman who shouted at Kyungsoo himself almost screamed at the suddenness of his appearance. This person had 2 stars on his epaulets. In front of them stood an honorable person, a lieutenant colonel. Jen Chu placed her hand at her temple and said hello to him. At that time, the shocking policeman asked him what brought him to them. The lieutenant colonel coughed and put his hand on Kyungsoo's shoulder and said with a smile that he came to see where their Kyungsoo worked. Jen Chu was furious that he called him their Kyungsoo. The lieutenant colonel asked what they had going on while their chief, still reeling from shock, asked how he knew Officer Kim Kyungsoo. Everyone looked at him waiting for an answer. At last, he placed his palm on Kyungsoo's head, showing his praise with the words that he was his savior. Kyungsoo happily put his hand at his temple saying hello while the lieutenant colonel told the others to take care of him. The garbage can was covered with cigarette butts and small trash, giving an unsightly impression. Kyungsoo sat relaxed on a bench and told the lieutenant colonel, who was standing there finishing his cigarette, that it must be nice to have a high rank, to which the lieutenant colonel asked if he needed more. The lieutenant colonel glanced at him with his cigarette in his mouth. Kyungsoo looked at him and asked him for a favor. A full, bright moon shone in the night sky. A light shone in the windows of the temple. Not far from where a bat was hanging on a tree, the monk held a small wooden stick rounded on the sides in his hand. Looking at the painting was a guy holding an umbrella. He tapped the stick on the iron round instrument, creating a harmonious sound. Suddenly he focused his attention on what was going on behind his back. He turned his head back a little. There was someone's shadow in the open dark passage. He asked who was there. The stranger replied that he was someone who does not forgive offense. Fear flashed in the monk's eyes. A masked guy stepped into his room. Creating a sense of mystery and unpredictability, he said he was a departed soul. In a vat in the middle of the room were 4 lit incense, in the middle of which was the very same painting. The monk reacted quickly and took hold of those sticks. His gaze was filled with anger. He swung the incense sticks in his direction and they flew at him with their other sharp end. In front of the guy's face, he saw their sharp end that could immediately hurt him, but having time to react quickly and duck his head to the side, the incense stuck into the wall. Guy grabs them to pull them out, threw them on the floor saying that a monk should not defame the Buddha's abode. The monk saw a familiar mask on him and asked who he was, to which the guy replied that he had already said he was a departed soul. The monk snapped his fingers and asked again if he was a departed soul. At the snap of his fingers, his bodyguards came out from behind the wall. The boy looked at the monk with a sharp look that did not convey fear. The monk looked at him the same way, but with a calm and confident look, knowing that he had men with whose hands he could do anything. He wished him a happy journey to paradise. In front of Kyungsoo's face stood the boys who were ready to kill him at the command of their master. The monk sat calmly in front of the Buddha while his guards ran to fight the guy. The monk was calm. His left arm was around his chest pointing upwards. One of the guys aimed a knife in the face at the bright December. The one immediately put his hands at the ready to strike. He punched the guy in the stomach with his fist, causing him to lose concentration over the situation and fail to fight back immediately. The knife flew upward from the guard's hands. Making a turn in the air, it fell clearly into the hand of the bright December. He started swinging it at the others, defending himself. One of the guys swung his axe at him with fury. There was an uncontrollable anger in his eyes that made him ready to kill the guy immediately. not confused. He swiftly walked past the guy's throat with the sharp blade of the knife. The dead body fell to the floor. The boys looked at him with even more rage at the fact that he had killed his comrade, and now they were even more motivated to take his life as well. Monk was amazed at his actions, as he didn't expect him to be more powerful than his men. The guy stood with a knife in his hands in front of the dead guys, a red light emanating from his eyes from under his mask. From his covered face came the appearance of a killer ready to take their lives. The boys were about to start a battle among themselves when Monk ordered them to stop. He looked at them with a passive expression without emitting any emotion of regret. The guy looked at them with a confident gaze. The video he wanted to record through the cameras in his vision was fuzzy. He realized that he couldn't record anything because of the plugs that Mai had installed. He asked the monk what they would do. It seemed there were still many souls waiting to be appeased. Out of one of his eyes glowed the red light of the hidden camera. The monk looked at him calmly. On the floor nearby lay in a pool of blood a dead guy with his throat slit, with his hand raised upwards, in which he held a knife. He said that if it wasn't true, then it meant they must turn into a ghost like him. The boys were about to attack him when the monk ordered them all to stand. With a serious look, he said that he didn't know who sent him, but it seems that this someone is dealing with evil spirits. And this mask? The monk asked him to come over. The guy was worried that he might take the mask off him now. He smilingly held out his hand and asked him to let him look at his face. The guy replied that he didn't need to do that. He was just stopping by to say hello. Said he would find out who he was soon enough on his own anyway, adding that for now he could prepare his head for execution. Bright December threw a sharp glance at him and remembered he had something else he wanted to tell him. He told the monk that he still had more training and practice to do. These words infuriated the monk and he lunged at him himself. He grabbed the mask with his hand, which scared the guy since he didn't want to show himself. Suddenly the other guys started to cover themselves from the smoke that suddenly filled the room. They started coughing and covering their noses. They speculated that it might be tear eye. One of them turned to the Bodhisattva asking if he was alright. He covered his face with his sleeve against the smoke and replied that there was nothing to worry about. He glanced toward the dark passage where the masked guy had disappeared to. His mask remained in his hand. He squeezed the hand it was in angrily and the mask shattered into small pieces. He turned and looked at the vat with the photo in it and the incense burning next to it with smoke coming out of it. He looked at the photo carefully as if the guy reminded him of someone. The photo was lit by the incense. He asked himself if it was a ghost. The weather was warm outside, and people were wearing summer clothes and doing their own things. Jong Joon looked disheveled and tired looking. Kyungsoo came up to him and said that they hadn't seen each other for a day and he had aged a dozen years, to which Jong Joon replied that it was all because of him and he had no idea how many problems he had now. Said one of them is the encroachment on the police officers. The noise. When Kyungsoo beat up a police officer on the street, he yelled at him whether he even realized how hard it would be to cover it up, while Kyungsoo didn't really pay much attention to what he said and said that if that creep had been caught earlier, nothing would have happened. To which Hong Joon said that it's not all that easy. He irritably said that they have proof anyway, so teaming up with the prosecutor's office. To which Kyungsoo replied that they only need to catch the bad guy. Then why all the hassle? Jong Joon exhaled heavily, realizing that he would not prove anything to him. He said how would the killer know that? Kyungsoo said that he didn't just kill people, he only killed those who should die. He reached out his hand towards Jong Joon, putting it to his throat. It looked like he was holding him and said the proof was his life. Jong Joon looked with a serious look at him and said to listen to him, trying to explain to him. Said that no person has the power to decide who is destined to die and who is worthy of life. All people should be judged according to the laws accepted in society. Kyungsoo asked if the idiot would get probation, to which he replied that even if they are not able to catch 10 criminals, one cannot commit even one miscarriage of justice. He explained that that's why they needed hard evidence, to which Kyungsoo said irritably that they needed the damn evidence too. He put his hand over his face with a tired look, knowing that the lack of evidence added to his work. With a disgruntled look he said it was a stuffy solution and thought about creating his own department then. Hong Joon started yelling at him and said that Kyungsoo was an officer and technically not a real one, so what kind of department could he be talking about? To which Kyungsoo replied that he was the strongest. Hong Joon pointed his finger at him and said that it was wrong. Kyungsoo didn't understand why that was wrong, to which Hong Joon explained that there was a hierarchy in the police system. Kyungsoo asked about how high you have to go to make your own team. Hong Joon replied that you have to get a small Mugunhwa and he has such stars. Kyungsoo asked again how to do that. He said with a sly look as if he was thinking of something. He said that he should then get to work soon and he would have to work hard to get promoted as soon as possible. Hong Joon asked what he was talking about. He closed his eyes and with a displeased look, he warned him not to get into trouble for his ideas and told him to sit quietly and that they would take care of everything themselves. Suddenly, he looked around and realized that Kyungsoo was no longer there, and he said it to himself, wondering where he had gone. The Ilsan Police Department, on which the night moon was shining. Jenchu interjected his question about what he had to do to get promoted. Kyungsoo asked the girl about the background check, to which she replied that of course you have to pass the background check. While one of the policemen was talking to a lady who was drunk and asked him to bring beer, the policeman asked Kyungsoo to deal with her as he couldn't stand her behavior anymore. Kyungsoo and Jenchu continued their conversation. Kyungsoo asked when he was going to be tested, to which she said she thought he had his memory back and he didn't even remember that. While the drunk girl was clinging to Kyungsoo's neck and kept saying she wanted to drink, Jenchu said to serve for at least a year. Kyungsoo was surprised to ask the number again, and the girl was still clinging to him and touching his face since no one was paying attention to her. Someone in the background asked Ken he if she had looked at the complaints, to which she said yes. Kyungsoo asked to make things quicker, while the drunk girl was yelling, waving her arms around, that they had bad service here. Kyungsoo covered the drunk girl with a blanket who was already passed out on the floor. Jenchu asked him why he was in such a hurry. Maybe he wanted to get a star, to which Kyungsoo said that would be great. Jenchu told him to come to his senses. For a regular officer to get a Manhwa you have to work hard for at least 10 years. She showed the number on her fingers on her hands. Kyungsoo asked if it needed to be done if even a person is a senior lieutenant colonel. Remembering Young Jun's appearance, the girl said with a slightly frustrated look that the rank advancement testing is for formality. The guy asked her if there were no other ways. She replied that is. Kyungsoo immediately looked at her questioningly, waiting for an explanation. This is a special promotion. With those words she pointed her finger at him, which meant that the task was unusual for him. She gave him a book of information and told him that if he could catch serious criminals and perform well, he might get a special promotion. Then she relaxed her face from serious and said that they don't have that much time, so they just do what they are told, so they have to deal with the usual complaints. Someone in the background asked Ken he to check some documents. With hope, Jenchu added that maybe someday they could too. The police station was filled with troublesome people as always. A policeman was standing next to two men, one of whom was sitting silently while the other was trying to prove something. But the policeman could no longer understand anything he was shouting. The night town was still active with residents. Someone in the department wondered where the jerk had gone. A girl in a beautiful dress was holding the hand of a man. By the look of him you could tell he was above the money status of ordinary people. They were smiling at each other and heading somewhere. At the entrance to the nightclub there was a fight. The guy took the other by the scruff of the neck and was ready to hit him while they were trying to disassemble. Suddenly someone appeared in front of the crowd of vacationers. Everyone paid attention to him. The girl and the man looked at him in surprise. The guys from the fight also forgot about their argument. Kyungsoo thought to himself, why would a police officer study for some tests when his job is to catch criminals? One should roughly work hard. Kyungsoo stood in a police officer's uniform amidst the cluster of people in the night city who were relaxing and having fun. With a smile, he said to get a special promotion. A lot of people sat relaxing in the night city, laughing and having fun. All people can be divided into 3 types. He took one of the guys as an example. He was relaxing with 2 girls. One was a smiling redhead. The other was her blonde friend. One of those types is former con artists, which this guy was. Of course, there are some people who broke the law in the first place, such as a person who drove on the road at a red traffic light without following the law. Kyungsoo had a serious, intense look. He was in a crowd of vacationing people who were enjoying a dance, while he stood silently among them, wondering if there were too many of these types of people. His gaze was set on serious decisions. Among such people, Bright December was not looking for petty offenses, such as a call girl to drunken men. He continued to look around the area. As he was looking for something much more grievous, his gaze suddenly caught sight of something that sent him into a state of shock. He turned in the direction his shocked gaze was directed. He saw a girl with a joyful and eager expression being given a not ordinary band-aid. Bright December found what he was looking for. The patch had a small pattern on it, a bit like the wings of a bird. A guy with the same patch on his neck was giving it to someone else. A Bright December glowed in his eyes. He had finally found the felony. The news club room was playing loud music and floodlights with green light. The guy at the DJ's workstation pressed a record, thus stopping the loud music. Customers started to show their displeasure and asked what was wrong. The guy, behind whom there were 2 guards, full of good spirits in a joking way, asked the customers why they do not move enough, whether after yesterday, and moved away. At this rate all there will collapse. The girl who had recently taken an unknown item in the form of a band-aid shouted that she needed a shampoo, said just 1 bottle and they'd rock. The club's DJ cracked a smile. With the same look he leaned over to them and asked if they wanted a drink already. The girls looked at him with a pleased look. He told them to open their mouths wide. The girls stood in a row with their eyes closed and mouths open, waiting for the alcohol to hit them. The guy turned to the men and told them that their thighs were falling off, holding the same band-aids in his hand. The guys looked at him with rapt attention. He took 2 bottles of champagne in his hands, ready to empty them, poured the contents over the visitors and threw many patches at them with a cry of catch. With a shout of joy he said that now they were going to have a hot night, filling them with expectations that this evening would be even more interesting. Suddenly a guy in the crowd interrupted his jovial attitude by calling him a humorist, insinuating that his hot night was bullshit. DJ's bright gaze faded, now looking with incomprehension at the stranger. Kyungsoo threw a sharp look at him with a band-aid in his hand, told him to expect a hot night in prison chowder. The boy's eyes filled with bewilderment. He immediately said with a sneer that maybe girls don't give him girls, that's why he's so angry. Offered him to take the cool thing, by which he meant the band-aid. Kyungsoo replied that he was fine as he was. He focused his attention on the band-aid with the words that it's just regular drugs anyway. DJ was stunned by his statement. People immediately became worried, and since they didn't know that the item that was in almost every attendee's hands was a drug, the guy decided to get out of the situation by saying that he was talking nonsense. Immediately he was filled with anger because the stranger had given away his secret and began to aggressively say that he was nobody and it was none of his business. Kyungsoo took the sweatshirt lock in his hands and started unbuttoning it. He was wearing a police uniform under his sweatshirt and told him to guess who he was by his appearance. The guy began to ask the guards quietly how the police could get here, and they answered that they did not know. Suddenly one of the guards was hit in the face with a champagne bottle. Kyungsoo's hand went down with relaxation after throwing it. With a threat, he said that they would have a flurry behind bars. The guy was full of anger toward him as well. He rushed to run away, shouted to the others that the police dog was here, implying that they needed to get the fuck out. He ran backstage and yelled to one of the employees to hide everything and run away. He didn't immediately realize what he was saying. A guard flew in through the open door and stumbled on the threshold. Kyungsoo ran in after him, hitting the employee in the leg and knocking him to the floor. They were lying on the floor with no strength to run while Kyungsoo rushed after the club DJ. The guard grabbed the handle of the door to open it and ran out of the room. Behind him he heard the aggressive voice of a guy yelling behind him, asking why he was standing still. The other side of the door was propped up with a chair, preventing him from opening it. In that room, the rest of the staff were lying unconscious. Kyungsoo appeared behind their backs. Those turned to him with anxiety on their faces. He looked at them angrily and asked them if they were playing catch-up. The guy jabbed his finger at him in surprise, saying that he had come alone, which was strange. Kyungsoo asked what difference it made. The guy immediately said with a sneer that he was shitting his pants because of some lonely mongrel, but he thought he had a whole pack running around with him. He turned to the 2 guards behind him with a serious look. Kyungsoo realized that he would need to adapt his strength now. The guard took out a red patch from the inside pocket of his jacket. Kyungsoo, seeing it, was surprised that it was red. One of them stuck it on the side of his neck. After that, the other one did the same. From the place where it was pasted, there were streaks, which meant that the person was drugged. They screamed because of the tremendous power they had gotten from them. Kyungsoo was surprised at their behavior. The guy said with a smile that he would make a good mincemeat, calling him a dog. The guards lunged at the policeman, but before they could make the first punch, Kyungsoo immediately punched one of them in the face with his fist. He collapsed to the floor, hitting his back. Kyungsoo said that it was better to keep your mouth shut at times like this. The guard cried out with a pain in his nose, which he held with his hands to stop the bleeding. Kyungsoo clenched his hand into a fist and said that was the way to go. No need to hold the pain in. The guy stood there bewildered as blood spatter flew around him, dumbfounded that some cop could beat up a tough guy while under the influence of drugs. Losing his concentration with fear, he collapsed to the floor without averting his frightened gaze. He immediately changed his face when Kyungsoo got too close to him and didn't know what to say. Addressed him as an officer, not a dog and such, with an awkward expression, trying to show that it was a mistake. He started offering to talk like civilized people, offered his help, and said he'd give it all up with the hope of not being banned to jail. Kyungsoo looked at him questioningly, asking if he would really give everything he needed. The guy immediately started offering money, girls, drugs. Kyungsoo, standing over him, briefly said he wanted a special promotion. The guy didn't know what he was talking about. He held out his hand in his direction with a killer look and said he only wanted a special promotion, after which only the guy's screams were heard. The news was talking about a drug lord being apprehended in a club in Ilsan last night, and the residents are concerned about the availability of drugs. The news video was paused. Jong Joon happily praised Kyungsoo for his work. He thanked him with a smile halfway down his face, overwhelmed by the emotion of admiration for himself. Hong Joon, who was sitting across from him, started shouting. He asked what kind of officer dares to quit his job and do whatever he wants, to which Kyungsoo replied while picking up his briefcase that he was already a corporal. The man said that his behavior during the arrest was not good either. Kyungsoo replied with a calm look that there was no need to make a fuss. He put something on the table and said to look at it. It was a small object wrapped in green leaves. Hong Joon asked what it was. Kyungsoo replied that it was the drugs from the crime scene that they probably hid in their safe. LT, Colonel, Hong Joon shouted, asking if he stole the evidence. Kyungsoo opened the leaf, asking if it reminded him of anything. There lay something blue-looking flowers of small size. They were associated with a red patch with something similar to the wings of a phoenix bird on it. This thing was being held by a guy in a phoenix mask who seemed to be associated with it. Next to him was a guy kneeling with his hands tied behind his back who had such two patches attached to his chest. In front of him stood a girl's silky, blonde hair. The blindfolded guy was saying that Ilson was under his control, and before he could finish, the girl turned to the two bodyguards who were wearing masks. She rudely told them why they were standing idly by, ordered them to stick another one. After listening to her, one of them had already prepared to stick it on with a bang. The guy screamed as he knew he was about to get rabid pain even more all over his body and begged the girl to stop doing it, calling her goddess Phoenix. The band-aid with a loud pop from his naked body ended up on his chest. The guy puffed up his cheeks to somehow contain his emotions. Suddenly his blood splattered all around. Some part of his body exploded. A masked girl sat dead on the couch in front of him, putting her foot on his leg, feeling the power in her hands. The masked guys dragged the dead body from the room. The girl glanced at her phone and mouthed October's punishment. Her body also had those band-aids all over it. Said she hated being punished. Looked carefully at the picture of a smiling Kyungsoo. Kyungsoo stood in a police uniform and said with a serious face that Phoenix is better known as a flamboyant cesspit. Added that she is a dirty, addicted bitch. Heavy breathing could be heard in the room. It was Kyungsoo working out, sweat dripping down his face, denoting hard physical labor. He was doing an exercise standing on one arm, saying that practicing in another body wasn't so bad because the person he found himself in was in good shape. Muscle, strength, flexibility, endurance. He kept a balance in everything. Kyungsoo stood with his head down, specifically a handstand with 3 fingers resting on his hands. Realized to get rid of the Bodhisattva and his gang, to wipe them all off the face of the earth. Suddenly the fingers slipped the other way and the guy lost his balance over his body. On the table was a framed photo of Kyungsoo when he was younger. At this time there was a loud sound of a guy collapsing to the floor in the room. Without any attempt to get up, he lay there trying to catch his breath while being immersed in his thoughts. His arms were spread out to the sides in the spacious room. With a tired look, he said that it was too little. He still needed more time. Jen Chu and the 2 policemen awkwardly asked Kyungsoo if he had an extra minute, addressing him as a senior patrolman. Kyungsoo looked at them indifferently and asked what the matter was. He was sitting on a bench in the gazebo and his 3 partners were standing next to him. He interjected that he meant they wanted a promotion. They cheerfully, with hope in their eyes, confirmed his words. The guy asked why they approached him specifically on this matter. He immediately exclaimed that it was because he was in charge. But her partner immediately put his hand over her mouth and said that it was because he had just been promoted. They decided to placate him by saying that if he needed help, he could call them at any time and they would work as hard as they could. While he removed her hand from her face with a dissatisfied look. Kyungsoo was silent while the guys were happily waiting for an answer. He asked why he needed their help, expecting to hear their arguments, to which Jen Chu was very surprised, as she did not expect such an answer, but thought he would immediately agree. She came forward and began to praise that they have always been on his side. Does he not remember? The guys confirmed her words. Kyungsoo replied that actually does not remember anything because of memory loss. The girl said confidently and loudly that they all endured punishments together. They visited him in the hospital. They did everything they could for him. Chung Min put his hand on Kyungsoo's shoulder. Coughing, he said there was something else. He put his hand to his heart as if he was speaking from the bottom of his heart, and with the kindest face possible. He reminded him, aren't they comrades after all? Kyungsoo was surprised at his word comrades. The temple building that stood in the cold rain. A guy with an umbrella was standing next to it. The guy was wearing a mask. Someone not far away asked if it was bright December. The stranger added, is he the killer who chooses his own victim? He had tattoos of tree branches on his muscular chest. Bright December threw a murderous glare at him. Next to him were two strong-looking guys. Their bodies had the same kind of tattoos but different colors, black and red, one of whom sarcastically said that it was crazy. Because of the rain, they were also under the same umbrella. With the same masks on their faces, they asked why he was even considered the best among them all. They gave him a hateful look and told him they didn't want to see him. Bright December stood not far away and listened to them in silence. He heard them mention the Bodhisattva. Instead of those guys, two others wearing a phoenix mask appeared. In the middle stood a beautiful girl whose face was also hidden behind a mask. She said that Bodhisattva only loves his brother December. Putting her hand on her mask on her face, she said that she was choking with envy. Bright December was watching her. She took off her mask and with a frightening look that inspired fear, told him that why not just get rid of him. Jenshu happily confirmed the words that they were comrades. Kyungsoo called their behavior very childish. Jenshu was in anticipation of a positive response. He suddenly started shouting at them and said that they were not comrades at all and should be promoted first. He shouted asking about where they had seen ordinary patrolmen call a corporal with 2 stars their comrade. Jenshu wanted to attack him out of anger, but the guys held her hands so she wouldn't break free and cause more trouble. She shouted at Kyungsoo that he was a selfish jerk to forget about his position and called him to fight her. The guy looked at her with a calm face, mocking her, saying that it was already a riot. While the girl didn't know where to stop herself from snapping at him, suddenly someone not far away interrupted their argument and shouted asking what they were doing here. Everyone turned back with a surprised look. Behind them stood the angry chief asking why they were loitering here. Everyone put a straight hand at their temples and obediently said hello to him, except for Kyungsoo, who did so grudgingly. The chief asked if they were done with their work. They replied that they had gone out for a short break. He glanced at them irritably. The chief said he didn't like them anyway, calling them flawed assholes. The 2 guys stood and listened to him intently while the girl barely paid attention to his words. He strode forward heading towards Kyungsoo. He smiled and said he didn't like everyone but Kyungsoo. The girl was even more angry when she heard that. The chief put his hand on Kyungsoo's shoulder and said that he was the star of their department and lucky. He asked if he hurt himself, to which Kyungsoo said that his shoulder hurt a little. The others stood there dumbfounded. He told Kyungsoo not to overwork himself. The guys looked at him with disgruntled faces and quietly said that the chief is a corrupt idiot. Thanks to Kyungsoo he will be promoted. So he bent down. He even went to kiss him on the cheek, but the guy grudgingly put his hand to keep him away and told him to keep his distance. Jenshu looked at this situation with interest. The clinic building that was lit up by the bright sunlight. The guy who had a fight outside the police facility with Kyungsoo was walking with the policeman and was angry at his abuser. The policeman put his hand on his shoulder and told him that it would hurt more if he was angry. After being discharged from the hospital, it was better not to exert himself too much. Hen asked him if he was angry after what Kyungsoo had done to him, hinting that it was impossible to react calmly here. With a stern look said that Kim Kyungsoo in the rank of senior corporal even sounds like nonsense, adding that it was all on purpose. The policeman, confirming his opinion, replied that everything in the department has been revolving around that idiot for the past few days. Hen's gaze was filled with anger at the man, and he said through gritted teeth that he wouldn't believe it until he saw it for himself. Suddenly a woman's voice addressed them from behind. In her hands she was holding some sweets in a bag. The boys did not immediately hear her request for help. The girl asked if they could give her directions. Hen didn't hear it and kept talking about how they didn't know anything themselves and needed to look on their phones, while the policeman tapped him on the back with a dumbfounded look at the girl for him to turn back around. They looked at her with a very surprised look. In the girl's hands in a bag were cupcakes in the shape of a flower. She smiled sweetly, fixing a strand of hair, and walked closer to them. Said her charge, sat down. Her look was as cute and attention-grabbing as possible. Hen tensed up, not expecting this situation, answered lucidly, while his friend asked not to get overexcited or he would be back in the hospital again. The girl asked them if they could help her. The guys immediately had a sly smile on their faces. They smiled sweetly, heading closer to her and started asking where she needed to go. The girl replied that she was looking for directions to the Ilsen ward. The guys happily replied that they were also from there and they could go with her. The girl was happy and agreed to go with them. She asked the guys if they knew Kim Kyungsoo. The guys were surprised by her question. They said that they knew him and he was replacing them now. Hyun asked what she wanted from him. She looked down thoughtfully as if searching for the right words and said she had something to give him, and if she lost it, he would be very angry. A wide smile immediately returned to them. They said they thought they were dating and almost changed their minds about helping her. The girl slipped her hand into the bag she was holding. Said that as a thank you they could eat these buns if they got hungry along the way. She held out her hand to give each of them one small bun. November, nicknamed Phoenix. According to the data that Bright December collected, is responsible for all financial crimes in China. This information was carefully read by the lieutenant colonel. They wield drugs. These drugs are divided by the strength of action and therefore, they're called Buddha's tears. The lieutenant colonel turned the sheet to the next page. At the station, the police officers sat at the entrance and went about their business. Since the criminals are afraid of the punishment, bodhisattva drugs are used by the top of the Hwaguxa clan. The front glass door opened to them. Kyungsoo was taking a cup of hot tea from the tray that Jenshu had brought him, with a pointed look at the door. The girl was munching on the bun she had brought with her. Suddenly, the bun she had bitten into was on the floor. On the street, the guys who were seeing the girl off fell on the floor. The buns she gave them fell from their hands. Passers-by started calling an ambulance. The girl was in the Ilson ward and calmly continued to eat them. The policeman looked at her. She was standing in the middle of the room they were in. At this time, the lieutenant colonel finished reading the information about her and called her a mutt. You could tell from Kyungsoo's expression that he didn't expect to see her here. Suddenly, with a mouthful of food, she pointed her finger and shouted that she had found him Corporal Appa. The girl stood there with a smile on her face. Jenshu asked what she could do to help her. The girl said only Paulownia leaves. Jenshu asked what she meant. She said she was talking about Paulownia flowers wrapped in leaves. Her look was crazy, like she was a bit out of her mind. The policeman told her to wait a moment while they checked. Jenshu turned to Kyungsoo and asked if they had received anything like that, but the girl immediately said no. Said there was no need to check anything, pointed her finger at Kyungsoo and added that this officer had them. Kyungsoo was indifferent to her words, as if he was used to seeing her like this. He said to himself that she hadn't changed at all while Jenshu asked him what she was talking about. The girl held out her hand and said to give it back, while Kyungsoo took out his phone and started calling Hongjun since he had no idea what was on her mind. He was out of range. Then Kyungsoo realized that the calls weren't going through because of the jamming. He threw his gaze at the surveillance camera and realized that they weren't working either. Jenshu asked why he wasn't answering the girl. The girl looked at him waiting for an answer. As long as he was serious and didn't want to let her near. That's when it all started. A teenage boy who looked like Kyungsoo was standing in the rain wearing a t-shirt with a wooden stick. A girl ran towards him with the same stick in her hands with intentions of starting a fight. She gripped it tightly with both hands. With all her might she swung it at him in the side of his neck. The boy glanced in the direction where he should now receive the blow. With his quick reflexes, he dodged to the side avoiding the blow and swung at her. Unlike him, the girl didn't have time to react and was hit in the side of her stomach. Her stick fell to the floor from her weak hands. She bent to her knees in an attempt to catch her breath and regain consciousness. Kyungsoo standing next to her with the wooden weapon pointed in her direction. The man who had been watching them from behind addressed him as Bi Gwan, and he turned to look at him. With a smile he asked if he had found anyone worthwhile. The guy pondered his question, glanced around at the men of about the same age who had also lost battles to him and answered no. The monk clacked his fingers and said he thought so. Two guys in black suits appeared behind them. On the floor lay the beaten-up guys with no strength. The girl looked at him with frightened eyes. The monk said to send them all to heaven. The two sturdy guys headed in their direction. The monk continued that we should send them all to heaven to see Buddha. The boy looked at him with a slightly frightened look. He didn't want them to take their lives, and with the hope that he would be listened to he said that if they were taught. Turning to the boys lying on the ground he continued that then they would be able to. While two guys in black were heading towards the frightened girl, the monk rudely addressed Bi Gwan by name. He said that he told him to suppress his feelings of pity and put his hands on his shoulders. Bi Gwan looked fearfully straight into his eyes and remained silent. He turned around. The guys he was fighting with were being poured something to drink one by one. The guy exhaled with pity listening to their screams. Suddenly, he heard the voice of a girl nearby who was addressing Buddha-san. Her fighting stick became upright on the ground, so the girl tried to stand up with its help. She looked powerless, but she barely picked up her weapon and said she could still fight. The monk asked her if she wanted to be useful, to which she said yes. The monk asked her if she wanted to be useful, to which the girl said yes. Leaning over to her with a smile on his face, he said that it would then be better for her to die and come to him again in a new life. The girl began to scream, pouring out her last hope in desperation to beg him. The guys started to forcefully give her a drink that would kill her. She tried her best to break free. Bi Gwan turned aside to avoid looking at this horrible sight. There was a dark-colored poison in the bowl. They forcefully opened her mouth and started pouring the contents of the bowl into it. Through her tears she continued to say her last words that were of mercy. Above the temple, the sky was filling with a bright orange hue due to the setting sun. An empty poison bowl lay on the ground. The monk told his assistants to clean up and get rid of the bodies. One of the boys suddenly called him to take a look. A girl was lying on the ground, the remnants of the poison that had been used to kill her dripping down her cheek. One of the guards lifted her body and said that this child was still breathing. The monk was surprised as she shouldn't be alive. The girl opened her eyes slightly. The monk took her by the shoulder and was not about to take her life already. The girl was sitting at a table with many plates with different pills in each of them. The monk stood behind her and said to empty all these plates in a month. He smiled and said that if she wanted to be his assistant. Through force she squeezed out a smile in response and agreed, calling him Mr. Buddha. She began to become more and more tolerant. And when she grew up, a monk stood in the temple in front of the Buddha statue with a mask in his hands and told the girl who sat on her knees in front of him that she was now November, nicknamed Phoenix. She took the mask in her hands, put it on her face and thanked him and told him she wouldn't let him down. It was then that she became the drug-addicted mutt that stood at that moment in the police station. You could tell by her look that she was in an incomprehensible state and asked the officer if he could hear her and why he didn't want to answer. In her black-heeled shoes she took a step forward. She leaned right in front of him and with a forced look asked where her shit was. She put her hand on his shoulder and told him to answer her. The guy just rolled his eyes. He realized that there were too many extra eyes around that were looking at him with incomprehension of what was going on. He repeated her words. Then she got happy and said that he was finally talking, replied that it was at his house. He smirked, as if giving her a reason to worry, and asked if she wanted to be his guest, thinking that all he had to do was lure her outside and he would kill her. The girl opened her eyes wide in surprise. Kyungsoo stood with his feet on the table and told her to follow him, but the policeman next to him told him that it was not proper to do so. The girl immediately shouted that he was a liar. She said with an innocent face that her brother would never keep drugs in his house. The cops got a little nervous after the drug talk. She stood in front of him and angrily asked him what he thought she would fall for his ruse. She pulled out a few pieces of band-aids from the bag she was holding. Kyungsoo saw them and immediately realized what they were. She threw them at him, but Kyungsoo deftly dodged them at the last second. The band-aids got on each of the faces of the other policemen standing behind them. Sung Min got it on his forehead. Hong Jun got it on his cheek. Jenshu also on his cheek. Streaks started coming from the place where the band-aid hit in different directions. They immediately collapsed on the table, losing their strength and awareness. The girl turned to Kyungsoo as if he were her brother. Two guys wearing Phoenix masks appeared in front of the police officers, who were sticking patches on the other workers, allowing them to turn off their minds. The chief was also under their influence. The girl was holding one and with a morbid smile, asked Kyungsoo if he would let them die, and if he didn't, his friends would die soon. Said that if his brother tells where her drugs are, as suddenly his hand was almost in her face. Without speaking she looked up with a startled look to see that she might get hit in the face right now. Kyungsoo swung at her, but she reacted in time and dodged to the side to avoid getting hit. He glanced in her direction after his hand passed over. She appeared to have one side of her shirt torn. Kyungsoo turned his back to her and she stared after him, her gaze speaking for itself, as if he didn't dare do such a thing to her. He held up a torn piece of her shirt with some kind of badge on it. Showing it, he said it was plugs. He squeezed it with his fingers and continued that they were gone. The girl was shocked that her shirt was ruined. Kyungsoo showed her the screen of an activated phone that had a call on it and told her that backup had been called. He picked up a baton with the words that there was no one around, swinging it in the air to convince her of his intentions, and told her that these were the perfect conditions for a murder. The girl smiled awkwardly and asked what he was talking about, making a fool of herself. With a menacing smile he replied that she would understand when he beat the crap out of her, started lightly slapping the stick on his palm and asked if he should start already. He said he hoped she would remember the good old days. The girl looked at Kyungsoo warily. She covered her mouth trying to remove her slight chuckle. With a smirk, she said Appa let out rude words and also raised his hand at the girl. She shifted her gaze to her torn shirt and mentioned for it as well. She looked at him with a sly glance and said, "Does he like the gesture?" Before she could finish, Kyungsoo swung his police baton at her for protection, but the girl managed to sit down. Suddenly, she realized that she still couldn't escape from the blow. With quick movements, Kyungsoo kicked her in the forehead. The girl lost her balance a bit and staggered backwards, dropping her bag on the floor. She covered her forehead with her hand at the point of impact. Removing it, she saw the blood from the wound on it. Her eyes filled with rage, thinking to herself that this fucking officer's mutt was going to die. Kyungsoo mockingly told her that she was just as ugly when she was angry. The girl let out a short ironic laugh. She quickly changed the emotion of anger, licked her finger that had blood on it and said that he surprised her, clarifying that he wasn't just a cop. Kyungsoo told her not to hold all the anger in. The girl wondered how he knew, asking if he was from some special unit. Leaving her guessing, he only told her who he knew and asked her how she thought she knew. she pulled another card out of her bra, held it in her hand with an intimidating look, said she didn't care about his previous work. She started laughing out loud. The guy's face said he was very bored to listen to her feigned laughter and said it was disgusting to listen to. Putting a band-aid on her neck, she smiled. She said that she would believe that he would find a suitable position in hell. The guy looked at her blankly. The girl lunged at him with one arm straightened forward to strike. Kyungsoo turned to her and asked if she really thought that one band-aid was enough, and with those words, he hit her in the face with the baton. The girl screamed and collapsed to the floor. Kyungsoo asked if she herself hadn't realized yet that she needed at least 10. Swinging again, he said it would only help if she wanted to at least try to resist him. She covered her face with her hands, trying to protect herself and prevent him from hitting her again. With fear, she kept laughing evilly, lunging towards him again but doing nothing. Kyungsoo put his hands up in front of her to stop her. She wiped her face with her bloody hand and said he was a son of a bitch. Kyungsoo said she hadn't changed at all. The girl looked at him questioningly. He told her that she continues to rely on drugs and doesn't pay enough attention to training. The girl looked at him with anger and bewilderment at the same time. He added that he could only thank her for that now. The girl shouted, asking who he thought he was since he imagined he knew her. Kyungsoo crouched down sharply and aimed his baton at her legs. He looked up at her and asked who she thought he was. With a blow, she was thrown backwards. The girl fell on her back. Kyungsoo aimed his police baton at her. Her eyes were filled with fright. Kyungsoo crouched over her and said that being on the verge of death from mutilation, one could guess who he was. She started screaming and asking what the hell he was talking about. Kyungsoo said that he realized that the drugs had already made her brain leak. He pressed the bat on her neck where the band-aid was, giving her more pain. The girl grabbed the baton with both hands in an attempt to get it away. The guy leaned closer to her and asked her if she would remember this before she died. She kept calling him a bastard and laughing despite the fact that she was getting less and less air and the pressure on her throat was terrible. Crinkling her face in pain, she asked him to let her go. The guy hatefully told her to die. The girl's eyes filled with fear even more. Kyungsoo pressed her throat more and more ruthlessly to kill her faster. She started to scream. Something happened and Kyungsoo was suddenly surprised. The baton at her throat broke. The girl immediately used the right moment and punched him in the face to throw him off. She tilted her head down on her knees in an attempt to regain consciousness. Kyungsoo looked at the broken baton and said that it was a piece of crap and the kind of crap they give to low-ranking officers. The girl swung and managed to say that now it was clear why they were fighting like low. With maximum effort, she aimed her fist at him. Kyungsoo covered his head with his hands to avoid the strong blow. His eyes widened in shock at what he saw. She was wearing a different colored band-aid than usual. Kyungsoo wondered what it could be. He had never seen such a patch before, which was on the forehead of a girl whose eyes had turned red in color. Filled with rage, he decided it was some kind of new one, lowered his shocked gaze downward. When he looked at his hands, there were streaks coming from where the patches were attached to his body. He realized that it wasn't good. If the band-aid had worked through touching the clothes. Looking at the girl, he said to himself that she wasn't better, yelling at him and asking who he was, expressing nervousness due to mixed feelings of panic and anger at the same time. She screamed, asking why he didn't understand that way, but she was interrupted by her guard, who suddenly opened the door and called out to her. He told her that Orchid-san had contacted them and backup was almost here. Kyungsoo waved his hand and told her to get out of here, adding that he would pity her today. But with a smirk on his face, he said they would see each other again. He looked at her disgruntled, exhausted face and thought it was obvious. Since the police wouldn't chase her, they'd die if they tried. The girl peeled the band-aid off her forehead and told the guards that they were coming and let him pass it on to everyone. He asked in confusion what was wrong with her face. Turning away, she bit her finger and thought about it while the guard asked if she was okay. A little frightened, as if immersed in memories, she couldn't understand why this cop reminded her of Bi Gwan. There were police cars and an ambulance outside the station. They were wheeling out unconscious injured cops on gurneys who were wearing band-aids. Hong Jun yelled at Kyungsoo for missing them. A broken baton flew into his face, interrupting his anger. Kyungsoo said that this wouldn't have happened if he had been given normal equipment. It's not normal for a baton to break at the slightest pressure. To which Hong Jun, holding the bridge of his nose, replied that these are normal batons, saying that they don't have to be strong. The two policemen who were watching them were shocked by their conversation, one of whom said aloud that he had thrown the baton in the face of the senior general. The other asked in bewilderment if it could be considered a rebellion against his superiors. Kyungsoo raised his hands, which had band-aid stripes on them, and told the general to look at them since he couldn't even feel them. The general looked at them and was dumbfounded by their appearance. He immediately called for a doctor. Kyungsoo thought to himself that the outcome was unpredictable. It was lucky that Phoenix was scared. He kept pondering about the patch. Did it work through contact with his clothes? Or did they increase the dosage? Or was it some new drug? While the doctor looked at his hands, he was in shock and didn't understand what was wrong with them. Kyungsoo thought that Phoenix would soon become a walking drug herself and that he had expected everything to go smoothly, but it seemed it wouldn't be that easy. He turned to the senior general and asked if he could ask one favor, to which the general exhaled, asking what he needed this time. Kyungsoo's room, with only moonlight coming in through the window. The multi-story house he lived in, with dark clouds floating above it. The hallway of the house was empty and the lights were on. Someone's shadow appeared in front of the front door to the apartment. The door opened slightly. A dark silhouette appeared in the threshold, watched from a high point by guys in Phoenix masks. Suddenly smoke appeared abruptly in the apartment. From it, two of Phoenix's security guys could be seen, who immediately pronounced that he was busted because they were using a drug that caused hallucinations and death. They said MS. Phoenix had asked for the dose to be increased to the maximum, so maybe he'd see more than hallucinations and he would die of an overdose. But Kyungsoo appeared in front of them, wearing a gas mask and the protective clothing he had asked Hyunjun for before, and most importantly not the cheap stuff, but the best there was. Kyungsoo said with a confident look that he knew they would be here. Kyungsoo scoffed that Phoenix was even afraid to come in person and called her a cowardly cat. He readied his gun and said he didn't care about her, saying it was time to use the new weapon. Kyungsoo pointed the gun at them. The guys exhaled heavily. His gaze was tensely fixed on the target. One of them wanted to say that this gun wasn't loaded, but then they realized that he actually had a loaded gun in his hands, whereupon they immediately went into a panic. Suddenly bullets started flying at one of them. They did not stop, making the sharp sound of gunfire. The bullets left marks all over the room, on the walls, on the ceiling. Many whipped toward the masked guys. Jars from the shelf shattered and fell to the floor. Bullets rained down on the guys, knocking them to the ground. Kyungsoo mercilessly kept pulling the trigger, eclipsing Mercy's mark. Those fell to the floor by the wall. Their bodies were full of hits and wounds. The guy looked at their mangled faces mutilated by the bullets, stripping them of their teeth and leaving them in a horrible state, and wondered. Lowered his gaze down and said that this gun was pretty good. The police car's flashers were working, flickering with bright blue light. The residents came out of the apartment in a frightened state, approached the police officers to find out what had happened, to which they told them to go back inside. They asked if what they had just heard were gunshots, to which the police replied that they were looking into the matter, and a yellow tape was hung at the entrance to Kyungsoo's apartment, forbidding entry. The guys were sitting tied up and their masks were lying next to them. The general said that even though the bullets were rubber bullets, Kyungsoo sat down and looked at the guys carefully. He asked them how many bullets they had been shot with and if they were breathing at all. Kyungsoo replied happily that he had given them what they deserved. Kyungsoo took off his helmet and said that they might wake up during transportation, so it would be necessary to remove the poison capsules from under their tongues. The general glanced at him. He cautiously asked if it was true that he was BQ. Kyungsoo replied that he was skeptical of him until this very moment, but surprisingly still entrusted the weapon. The general said that he had just realized it, and how could any sane person even believe such a thing? But after the incident with the drugs, the Phoenix, and now these beat-up guys, he said he was almost 99% sure he was B Queen, to which the guy asked why not 100%. The general stood up and said the reason he was 1% doubtful was because he was quiet for a bit and continued that if he really is Bi Queen, then why didn't he kill MANHUA? Kyungsoo replied to him that he said that witnesses are important and how could a police officer even say something like that? The general said that from a policeman's point of view, it's true, but from Kyungsoo's point of view, MANHUA, aka Buddha, every citizen of this country respects and appreciates him and considers him to be the reincarnation of the real Buddha. Kyungsoo asked with a stern look, how then would the society react to the bastard's death? He added that besides just killing him won't solve the problem. This part of the world is much bigger than he thought. The general asked if there were any other organizations besides Hwaguxa, to which Kyungsoo indifferently replied that he didn't care about them anymore. He picked up his gun and loaded it. While doing so, he said that he wanted to achieve the complete downfall of that fucking monk. A desire for revenge was visible in his eyes. The general looked on and listened to his plans to kill the monk. The guy continued that it was so that no one would live a life like him. After a brief pause on the general's part, he said he would help him. He offered to send him to jail together and held out his hand, which meant working together. Kyungsoo looked at him with surprise. He asked how he was going to help him, if he was the one who helped him not to die at his hands. He smiled and they crossed their fingers together. Kyungsoo told him to obey if life was precious and let go of his hand, which he squeezed threateningly so that he would hear him and agree without further ado. The general bent his legs at the knees in pain. Hongjun pressed his sore arm with a look of displeasure on his face. Kyungsoo said that it wasn't that he didn't try to kill him, he just couldn't do it. Someone's hand reached forward. Kyungsoo asked the general who he thought who taught him everything he knows, remembering Yuwa's techniques. With the thumbs of his hands, he pressed on the center of the phoenix's throat, who couldn't breathe and was trying her best to grab air in an effort not to suffocate. He held her in the air while the girl tried to say his name for him to let her go, but the monk looked at her with no sense of pity. She asked for his forgiveness, hoping it would help. The monk's eyes were filled with rage and a desire to hurt her more. He abruptly threw the girl to the floor with force, her body colliding with the surface with a loud sound. The girl lay on the floor unable to say a word. The monk called her a crazy bitch and said that the large amount of drugs had made her brain leak. He looked at her motionless body and said that she took the drugs first and then went to the station. The girl with tears in her eyes begged for forgiveness. He called her by name. Phoenix shifted her gaze to him with consternation. With a threat, he said it seemed she needed to be taught a lesson. The girl started to crawl away from him in panic as she realized she was in danger. The monk looked at her with a look full of rage and anger as he listened to her pleas for mercy. Phoenix turned to him hysterically and with eyes filled with fear and told him that she realized her mistake and it wouldn't happen again. Suddenly they heard someone's laughter and turned their heads in the direction it was coming from. The voice of a guy who had a tattoo on his chest in the shape of leaves of some tree laughing at Phoenix was talking about how she was tearing up here. He had the same tattoo on his muscular leg. He said she had hit a new bottom, calling her a druggie. Two powerful masked guys appeared in front of them. One of them told her that if she cried a lot she would lose muscle mass. The other added that in her case it would lead to quite a few problems. She looked at them and realized they were Lespedicia's brothers. Phoenix shouted asking what these bastards forgot here, as suddenly a girl appeared in front of her who reacted with incomprehension to her question. In front of her face was a pink fan in the colors of the sakura tree and addressed her calling her friend. The girl was wearing a mask. She asked Phoenix if it had occurred to her that Mr. Buddha might have called them. She was surprised when she realized it was the girl nicknamed Cherry Blossom. One of Lespedicia's brothers didn't expect to see her here and called her a bitch. The girl turned questioningly to Mr. Buddha. He said everyone was finally getting ready. This business of destroying the November Phoenix. The girl looked at him in incomprehension. Everyone stood around her waiting for the monk's next words. He said it was already safe to begin. The monk turned away and started to walk away for something. Phoenix shouted hopefully after him. She promised that she would give it all back. Just let him ask her. At that time a click was heard from his side as he opened the box and said that he didn't need to do that. He turned to her and said he had already returned everything, showing her the box he had opened and inside was something wrapped in green leaves from a tree. She didn't understand how he had done it. The monk looked at the boys and asked what they thought about it. One of the brothers was called Black Lespedicia. The other one was called July Lespedicia. And the girl is a March Cherry Blossom. July Lespedicia said we need to get rid of this drug-addicted mutt. To which the other brother replied that she was using drugs to get stronger. What could be more disgusting than that? Cherry Blossom turned to Phoenix who instantly turned around. The girl told Phoenix that they have gotten very close over the years, but you have to be the best to survive in this cold and cruel world. The monk said that the majority had already voted. Phoenix kneeling down addressed him as Buddha. She looked up at him and said he was too cruel, tears streaming down her cheeks. She began to say that they were originally going to get rid of her, to which July Lespedicia grudgingly said that she was whining again. Phoenix screamed accusing Buddha of purposely bringing the bastards against her. Cherry Blossom said resentfully that's how she felt about her. Phoenix sat on the floor sobbing. Cherry Blossom headed towards Buddha. Phoenix looked at him with innocent eyes while wiping away her tears. The girl bent down and handed Buddha some sort of item. It was a gun. Buddha took it from the girl's hands and turned to Phoenix. He pointed the weapon at her with the words that he did not need useless helpers. Her eyes reflected the fear of imminent death. The monk put one hand in front of him, and in the other he held the gun pointed at her and said, "Save us, merciful Buddha." He was about to pull the trigger. But suddenly Phoenix lowered her head to the floor and shouted that she had invented a new drug. The monk was surprised at her sudden announcement. She said that this drug was 5 times stronger than the past one. Kneeling with her head down, she said that she had developed it herself, so it was unlikely to be caught for testing. One of the guys grudgingly said that it was drugs again, insinuating that that was all Phoenix was focusing on. Monk asked the amount, to which the girl replied about 10 kilos. Monk, keeping his composure, asked about delivery. She said she had considered and connected all the paths, all the red light streets of Korea, Japan, China, and other South Asian countries. She looked up at him and asked him to give her another 6 months and asked for nothing more, saying that she would still be useful to him. The monk replied that he would give her half of it, and putting his gun hand down said that he had lost too much because of her tricks, so he would give her 3 months to prove that she deserved to live. Her face immediately transformed into a slight smile, agreeing with his decision. Jen was sitting on her bed in the hospital, unable to speak due to the effects of the drugs. Kyungsoo asked what was wrong with her, to which his partner replied that she was now regaining consciousness and the doctors said that she was under the influence of drugs. She tried to say something slurred, pointing at her mouth. Kyungsoo asked what she was saying, to which the guy said she was asking if Kyungsoo could wipe her drool. He said it was something gross. He took a handkerchief and reluctantly wiped her drool. The policeman said he was surprised he came here at all, so they were colleagues after all. Kyungsoo replied that they had mentioned that they had visited him when he was in the hospital, so he had come even under those conditions. The girl was slurring her words, and the policeman said she was talking at Kyungsoo for being a rude bastard. Hongmin cheerfully asked him if he was getting promoted again. In good faith, he said he was jealous. Kyungsoo replied that he shouldn't be jealous, but take control of himself, waved her off and said he had to go. The guys looked at him, but Jenny just sat silently on the bed with a rag in her mouth, which Kyungsoo had put in her mouth so she wouldn't have to hear her calling him names. The door closed, leaving behind a loud bang, and they said to each other that Kyungsoo had changed a lot. After saying that, all 3 of them exhaled heavily. In the building where the general was, there was a question about what to do now. Hong Jun sat on the chair and said he was thinking about it, mentioning that there was a parasite in the ward. Kyungsoo was sitting across from him. He asked him again. He said he wanted to check the drugs Kyungsoo had brought him, so he sent them for examination. But they were missing and it seems someone had managed to steal them. He asked if he had any idea who it could be, to which Kyungsoo said he didn't know. He couldn't know everything about the police system. Kyungsoo said that the drugs were their main evidence and he would get more cover once he caught the mutt. Sitting on the couch, he asked them to handle the internal issues on their own and to get information from Phoenix's subordinates, and the general replied that they were still interrogating. Kyungsoo recalled that he said they had a special unit to investigate the Hwaguxa clan and asked when they would bring him in. The general looked down guiltily, said that they were actually all dead and there was no one left. Kyungsoo was shocked by this information. He swung his fist at the general and angrily shouted, "How dare he lie," calling him a bastard, to which the general replied in the same raised tone that he didn't fully trust him then. So, Kyungsoo punched him in the face with his fist and told him not to move or he'd get hurt. The general yelled for his forgiveness. He suggested that he didn't create his squad. Kyungsoo stopped his aggressive behavior and interjected. Kyungsoo reminded him that he said you need at least 1 Manhwa to make your own squad. The general replied that it was okay. The general shouted, directing attention to his position, that he had 2 stars and who would dare be against it. Kyungsoo roughly pulled his tie, showing his power over him, and said that he would oppose since he likes to work alone. The general shouted that he himself said he needed a team, to which Kyungsoo replied that it was because they screwed up and he didn't mean it. Kyungsoo reached out for his stars on his epaulets, but the general yelled his name, pushing his hand away. He said the police force was complicated and he would only be able to work alone for so long, so it would be easier with a team. That way he would get more funding and be easier to account for. Kyungsoo looked at him, pondering his words. The general put his hands together and said with a serious look that it was his order as superintendent to form a team. Kyungsoo, standing with 1 foot on the table the general was sitting in front of, said that he couldn't form his own because he was under too much surveillance and it would be too much of a risk. He asked if that was an order. The general looked at him questioningly, told the general that if he asked nicely then he would follow the order. The general rolled his eyes reluctantly and asked to form a team. The police officers stood by Jenhee's bed. They asked Kyungsoo if he would form his own team. All 3 of them opened their mouths in surprise. They asked how a corporal could form his own squad. Kyungsoo said he was just ordered to. The guy said it's great to have a superintendent watching your back. He tried to say something. The guy deciphered that she asked who would make the squad. Kyungsoo confidently kept his hands in his pockets and said of course it would be them. The guy started tugging on his shoulders and thanking him. Kyungsoo proudly said if they had anyone else in the squad other than the three of them. Hongmin tearfully replied that he thought he was a bastard after he hit his head, but he still hadn't forgotten about them. Jenhee sat on the bed and thanked him indistinctly through her tears, saying that they would serve him well. Hee-jun wiped his tears and said that he thought he would die doing paperwork, but it's good to have colleagues. Kyungsoo asked him about his colleagues. He asked what he meant by colleagues and if they had forgotten where they belonged. The guys didn't expect him to say that. They turned to him asking him what happened to him. Kyungsoo exhaled explaining that he didn't need helpers, he just needed an obedient crowd that would follow his instructions. The guys asked in bewilderment what it meant that they were not his colleagues. He arrogantly confirmed their words by adding that they were all his slaves. People who die when he commands and live when again he allows. Jenhee was furious at the word slaves. Kyungsoo with a smile that meant pride said that if they understood, they could start calling him master. The guys were in the hospital room in bewilderment. Kyungsoo was thinking that based on the report that Hong Jong had given him, one of the policemen who was in the ward was named Hwang Hee-jun, age 25. He does boxing, kickboxing, taekwondo and other martial arts. According to the information available, he is not a bad candidate. However, he failed the written exam 4 times and somehow got here. Hee-jun turned to Kyungsoo. He asked about the meaning of chief. Is it okay to call those who don't even have one small Magungwa that? Suddenly Song Hyun interrupted him and said he wasn't a chief but a master. Jenhee was as usual unfazed by their stupid behavior. The balding guy next to Hee-jun. That's Lee Sung-hyun, 25 years old. He's good at martial arts, meaning hand-to-hand or floor fighting, jiu-jitsu and judo. His background isn't too bad either, but on the day of the interview, he cried like a little baby. He tearfully turned to Kyungsoo and said he didn't quite understand what Mr. means. It sounds horrible. He reminded that they are colleagues after all. Jenhee looked at him rolling her eyes at his whining. She said with a disgruntled expression that he was crying again, so his muscles would burn, to which Hee-jun asked happily that her speech had finally improved, ignoring her rude words. And finally Jo Jenhee, age 25, has no experience in any sport. She came in last place in the running sports test, the weakest officer in the entire department, but she was the first to finish the written exam, and ranked first in many interviews. She looked at Kyungsoo and said that she would do whatever he ordered, basically what she was expected to do. She folded her hands in front of her and excitedly called him master. This girl is very smart and asked him to take her into the squad. The green forest was illuminated by the rays of the warm and bright sun. All 3 of them were outside wearing sportswear. They stared at one point with astonishment. Kyungsoo was sitting on the ground and doing stretching. Hee-jun addressed him by his first name, but Jenhee interrupted him, insinuating that he should say sir. He asked why they were gathered on a day off, but Kyungsoo didn't answer his question and said that they were standing up because they should start warming up. He pointed his finger at them, reminding them that they were police officers. The guys didn't know what that meant. Then he pointed his finger at himself and said that he was a dangerous killer and they had 5 minutes to prepare, after which time they should all take him down at once. Hee-jun asked if he was sure since it's 3 against 1. Sung Hyun also wanted to add something but Jenhee Nova interrupted, reminding him to call him master. Sung Hyun turned to him as Jenhee had just reminded him and said that in case his boss hurt himself, to which Kyungsoo replied that the 4th minute had gone by. He was charging with the words that they would start in exactly 4 minutes. You could see from his look that he was serious. The guys moved a little further away and sat down in a circle with their backs to Kyungsoo, and started whispering amongst themselves. Jenhee said that jerk Kyungsoo had lost his mind, to which Sung Hyun replied that she had told him to call him Mr. She just waved it off, saying that it didn't make any difference to anyone. He couldn't hear it anyway. Just then Kyungsoo shouted that he could hear everything. The guys turned to them smiling awkwardly. The girl corrected the word to Mr. Hee-jun asked what they should do since they agreed to obey his orders. Jenhee with a serious face answered him to pretend like he was going to attack him and Sung Hyun should pin him to the ground. Sung Hyun started to get nervous and said he was afraid to do it. Hee-jun asked if he should just run at him, to which the girl called him an idiot and said that he was boxing so he should use his skills himself. Kyungsoo took off his sweatshirt with a strong, pumped-up body underneath and asked if they were ready, heading in their direction. The guys were surprised to see him in such good physical shape. Kyungsoo said that time was up and it was time to start. Jenhee shouted in support of Hee-jun and directed him to fight, while he only repeated the words to deceive his opponent. He hesitantly stood in front of Kyungsoo. Everyone kept repeating the word deceive. Jun clenched his fists near his chest and started running on the spot while asking if he should do so. The angry Jen stood behind him and shouted at him. Kyungsoo saw this and asked if it was tap dancing. Jen yelled that he was a jerk and needed to get closer. Suddenly she and Sung Hyun looked up. A shadow appeared above them and was coming from high above them. It flew up from a hard blow to Jun's face, his blood splattering to the sides. Kyungsoo relaxed his body a little after delivering the first blow. Jun was lying on the floor. Song Hyun and Jen ran up to them to see if he was okay. Kyungsoo headed towards them while saying they were joking or something. The girl shouted at him and pointed at the frightened Sung Hyun. He ran backwards screaming in fright and the girl looked at him in incomprehension. He ran with tears in his eyes and repeated that he couldn't. Suddenly he heard Kyungsoo tell him not to show his back. After catching up with him, he ran beside him. Sung Hyun looked at him expecting him to do something to him. He hit him hard in the face with his fist, calling him an empty-headed idiot. The guy fell to the floor. Jen watched with shock on her face. Kyungsoo turned to her side. The girl got a little nervous as she realized it was her turn to get punched in the face. He was about to start on her as well, but then she suddenly asked him to give him a moment. She smiled with fear in her eyes and said his name, to which he immediately said no without listening to the rest. She corrected herself and addressed him as a gentleman, pressing on pity and asked him not to raise his hand on the girl. Kyungsoo gently wrapped his hands around the girl's face. Suddenly hitting her chin with his knee said that aren't women already police officers? Jen crouched on the floor, her voice shaking with shock because she was bleeding. Kyungsoo threw a glance at them and said that they must be completely out of their world and how they were even going to catch criminals. He gave them permission to rest for 10 minutes, after which they would repeat the training 3 more times. With tired eyes, Jen wiped the blood from her lip. Sung Hyun was lying on the floor with no strength, blood flowing from his nose. Kyungsoo said that if they didn't want to get kicked in the hara, then let them show him what they could do. He roughly ordered them to respond. The guys reluctantly agreed. The police general's building had white clouds slowly floating over it. He sat eating ice cream on a stick asking Kyungsoo how the squad was doing. He said it was a nightmare. They were scum, and how did they even pass the exams and become officers? The general told him not to be so strict or he would overdo it. Kyungsoo said with a wary look that he knew they weren't after common criminals. The general said he knew it well. Kyungsoo banged his fist on the table and angrily asked when the interrogation would be over and why there was no progress, to which the general replied that he couldn't do anything because they were silent. He said he wanted to get a confession, to which Kyungsoo shouted back that it was a drug business and they had brothers everywhere. What did he expect then? Kyungsoo mockingly said it was his own fault for letting those roosters get away. The general with an indifferent face said he was sorry too. He decided that he would interrogate them, to which the general warned him not to torture them. Kyungsoo agreed. They sat across from each other. Kyungsoo said the country was serious about human rights as expected. The general said he had nothing to say. He asked that it turns out that torture was ruled out. Kyungsoo smiled and said to entrust it to him, adding that he had a great idea. A soft light was coming off the bulb. At a table with a laptop and a couple folders on it sat 2 bound and battered guys, Phoenix guards. Someone had walked into their room. The guy asked them how Cho Sang-mook was doing, to which the guys said it was useless and they wouldn't say anything. The man continued that it was him about the one in the blue floral print clothes, the right hand of the Phoenix. The guys were surprised how he knew that. He said he was kind of left-handed after all, but still asked if he was right or left-handed, to which the guys were puzzled and asked what he was talking about. The man asked about this mud hanging around Phoenix too. The guys asked who he was. He stepped into the light, told them they hadn't seen each other in a while, walked up to their table and introduced himself as Bi Gwan. His look was menacing. Feeling the power and authority on him, offered to talk. Kyungsoo leaned one hand on the table. One of the guys shouted his name in surprise, to which the other guy rudely told him that Bi Gwan was already dead. The one anxiously replied that he really looked like Bi Gwan. With a slight smile, Kyungsoo said that they seemed to have seen each other before. Looking at the surprised guy's bare torso, he turned his attention to a spot in the middle of his rib cage and said he recognized that scar. Asked if it must be a stiletto mark. Said he must have been beaten up by Phoenix for smuggling drugs. The guy sitting next to him turned his head to him and asked him if it was true, but he only said in bewilderment that Bi Gwan wasn't dead after all, to which he replied that Mr. Buddha had given him a top-secret mission. He said that he had to fake his death and infiltrate the police system to trace all the steps of the top brass. The guys were surprised by the information. One of them said he had heard that Phoenix had lost her drugs and invaded the police station, but all to no avail. Bi Gwan said her full nickname. The guys looked at him with fear in their eyes. He leaned closer to them and asked where she was now, his emotionless gaze growing more and more fearful. He reassured them that he had jammed the combs with orchid plugs so they could talk normally and Phoenix's fate depended on their answers. If she's just lying in her crib and sleeping sweetly right now and that's after making all this mess. The boys looked at him and listened attentively. He said on the orders of Lord Buddha. After looking at them with a sharp look he continued that he would be forced to terminate her life. The boys started shouting at him not to worry about mess. Phoenix. They said that she was now developing a new kind of drug. Bi Gwan carefully looked at their faces that expressed weakness and powerlessness in front of him. A sly smile appeared on his face with the words that this needed to be discussed further. The general sat on the sofa in his office and flipped a piece of paper to the next side and said that it was unbelievable that the drug was 5 times more powerful. Kyungsoo sat across from him and pulling the mask off his neck, said they planned to distribute it on the streets in 6 months and asked to see the report. That showed all the club outlets under the control of Phoenix and the gangs distributing her drugs. The general asked if he'd been able to find out where Ms. Phoenix herself lived, to which Kyungsoo, holding a cloth mask, said that even that bald idiot didn't know where she was, and probably only her assistants knew about it. He replied that then we should bring them in and shake them out. Kyungsoo agreed and added that we should break into the headquarters and get those bastards, but he didn't think it would be that easy to get any information. Phoenix sat on the sofa with her leg folded over in thought. There were many patches on her body and everyone around her in smoke that came from incense. Someone wearing white men's expensive shoes walked into her room and addressed her by her nickname. It was Cho Sang-mook, the sales manager. He put one hand behind his head and awkwardly asked 3 months wasn't too short. He said that there was a saying, you can't go too far, and the guy standing next to him confirmed that he was right. The guy standing next to him eating a blue candy on a stick was Kim Dongchul, who was the production manager, and he told her that as far as he knew, 2 of their men had already been caught by the cops. Dongchul continued that rushing would be very risky and it would be better to ask Mr. Buddha for a little more time. Sang-mook agreed with him. Phoenix hopelessly asked if they would then take responsibility if she was violated again. Before they could say a word, someone behind them first gave an affirmative answer. The guys shifted their gaze back. There was a girl with blue hair standing behind them. It was Sanpai. She said with a smile that she would take responsibility herself. She said that fear was overpowering her mind, sweetly asking what happened while she wasn't around, giving her a chance to speak up. Phoenix sternly replied that if she said she'd do everything in 3 months. Looking at them with a piercing look said that meant it had to be done in 3 months and asked if they understood everything. She turned to Sang-mook and told him to look for items, spread and move the date. He accepted her assignment putting one hand behind his head. Dongchul gave the order to prepare everything necessary to which he replied that he would do his best. She addressed Sangpai by name. The girl looked at her calmly awaiting her task. The room was filled with thick smoke, creating a cozy atmosphere. It was coming from special bowls, and blue drug flowers lay on a napkin nearby. Phoenix sat in Sangpai's embrace. Her embrace made her feel warm and safe. She was reassuring her, telling her that there was no need to be afraid, and that she would always be there for her, never letting her out of her gentle arms. With a smile, she said that she would take care of everything, her words sounding like a promise recognized by sincerity. Jen Hee, Sun Hyun, and Hee Jun were already falling exhausted on the floor asking to be slower. Kyungsoo said that they had already rested 10 minutes ago so they should get up and try again. Jen Hee was angry at him because of his stubborn nature. She started yelling at him and even addressed him by his name instead of Mr. She said this is too much and who even said they have to practice. Kyungsoo replied that they themselves said they were willing to do anything. Jen Hee fell to her knees out of desperation and yelled that this was already some kind of torture. Said that they joined the squad to catch criminals, not to fight him. Kyungsoo only said unfortunately on her salary, adding a note of sarcasm to his words, as if embellishing an ironic amount of regret. Remembering their words when he asked them if they really wanted to catch criminals, they all happily agreed. Kyungsoo ran forward and said to follow him. Jen Hee, still sitting on the ground with no strength, asked where he was going. They were at some place where there were small buildings looked like garages with holes in the roof. The door to one of them opened. The guys went inside. Everyone was shocked except Kyungsoo, because he already knew what was there. In front of them were men with boxes of drugs. Kyungsoo calmly said they were there. One of the guys sitting at the table asked rudely what the hell was going on. Jen Hee turned to him and first addressed him by his name, then redirected herself stuttering in fear and called him Mr. Kyungsoo, only asked what they were waiting for. He said that the criminals were right in front of them and asked if they should catch them. They were shocked by his words. One of them emotionlessly asked if they were cops. Kyungsoo pushed the guys forward with his foot and said with a smile that they were. They fell to the floor from the strong push in the back and gave him a worried look. Again they turned to him like a lord in their last hope. The one sitting at the table was in charge. He told his guys to get rid of them. They started to stretch their arms before the fight. Kyungsoo came outside and mockingly wished them luck. The guys looked at him with a frightened look, and Sungman's tears even rolled down his eyes. A crowd of strong guys were standing in front of them, ready to beat them up. Looking at their serious looks, he just said shit, realizing that they were in trouble. The guys stood there not knowing what to do. Sunghyun cried that he wanted to go home. Hee-jun worriedly asked what they should do now, saying that he had fought one-on-one before, but he had never fought against a crowd before. Jenhee crossed her arms on her chest and told them to calm down, as if the situation didn't scare her much, said that they wouldn't die here after all, and that Kyungsoo was a complete bastard, but he wouldn't leave them to die. They turned around and looked out the window where Kyungsoo was standing outside. Jenhee said firmly that they would show him that they were real police officers. Kyungsoo thought to himself that her words were expected. He watched them. He said that she was smart enough to realize that in a situation like this you have to stay calm. The girl on the backside again said that Kyungsoo will still see what they can do. She shouted to the guys to catch the guys she was pointing her finger at. The guys didn't move because of fear. Kyungsoo calmly thought that although she was smart, but her actions were completely useless. Hee-jun excitedly asked how to do it, to which he replied that he should hit first as they discussed. Gaining courage, he ran forward screaming. The girl supported him as best she could with words following him. He hesitantly held his fists in front of him with his eyes closed, not really believing in his strength in front of a better opponent in his opinion. While the guy he was running at had already aimed his fist at him, he raised his hand sharply and struck his face with force. Sung Hyun looked at this in bewilderment, not knowing how to react to the situation. He shouted to remind him that if he put his head under the fist coming at him, the guy was hitting Hee-jun with his fist trying to hit his face or body. The guy hesitantly said that it hurt, to which the guy replied that it couldn't be otherwise. Hee-jun was suddenly surprised when he realized that it didn't hurt that much. He questioned if it really didn't hurt, to which he replied that compared to Kyungsoo, he fights like a child. As the blows came at him, he wondered if he was so used to Kyungsoo's fists. Confidence appeared in his eyes. He punched the guy in the stomach when he wanted to attack him again, telling him it didn't hurt at all. He shouted at them to come up again, Sunghyun wondering if their punches were really that weak compared to Kyungsoo's. A guy swung a stick at Hee-jun from behind while he was out of sight. Sung Hyun noticed it. Hee-jun turned back expecting to be hurt now, as he wouldn't be able to react in time. The guy who was going to hit him with the stick became even more aggressive and was ready to strike. Suddenly, he bent at the knees and fell down because he was attacked from behind by Sunghyun. He shouted with anger and was full of persistence. Kyungsoo watched this and said that they had gotten into the taste. These two could be useful if they were trained some more. He threw his gaze at Jenhee, who only supported the guys with words and stood still. The man who was sitting at the table, who seemed to be in charge, banged his fist on it with words that they were useless assholes. Everyone stopped the fight and looked at him. He started undoing the buttons of his shirt while saying that they let two pathetic cops kick their ass. He pulled it off and tossed it aside. His arms were almost entirely tattooed and said it was embarrassing. Here the guys were already tensing up. Kyungsoo realized that they had let fear overpower the mind. And if you let fear into your mind, the man in aggression shouted that he would kill them and was actually much stronger. First, he hit Sunghyun in the face with his fist. The man stumbled backwards from the sheer force. Hee-jun turned to him and shouted his name in panic. Sunghyun was lying on the floor with a sharp pain in his nose. Hee-jun looked at his opponent with a frightened look. Kyungsoo said that they still had a lot to learn while screams sounded from the other side of the window. A man stood near Hee-jun's head who was lying on the floor. Looking at them, he said, "Did his partners get beaten up by those two idiots? What a pity." He threw a frown at Jenhee. She bowed to him saying she was surrendering. He looked at her questioningly. She looked up at him and said she would tell him everything she knows. Just don't let him hit her. Kyungsoo said at Jenhee that she was just a fool doing that. Suddenly his eyes got wider with surprise. Jenhee was trying to discreetly take something out of her pocket. It was a stun gun. She hit his leg with it with anger. He started screaming in frantic pain. The girl mercilessly continued to hold the taser with a wish for him to die. He clenched his teeth with anger and tried to say something to her. He barely got his foot out of the way and with his hands up shouted that she was a filthy rag. He swung his foot in her face, but before he could strike, Kyungsoo appeared over Jenhee sitting on the floor defending her and kicked the drug lord in the groin. He was pushed backwards. Kyungsoo swung at him again. He threw his weight on the table. He was shocked by the sudden appearance of Kyungsoo. He finished the fight with him and sat down on the table where the beaten drug lord was lying next to him, asking if they understood how it felt. The beaten guys looked at him with pity in their eyes. He asked if they realized how useless they were, to which no one gave an answer. He said to go and get the drugs. One of the guys asked if they could just leave the crooks behind. Kyungsoo said no one needed them and let someone else take care of it. He stood in front of them with a gruff expression with his arms crossed over his chest and asked why they needed the extra trouble, saying that they were already 3 pains in the ass right now, hinting at them. Behind Sang-mook were 2 guys wearing phoenix bird masks. He crouched down in front of this same drug lord, who addressed him as a gentleman while kneeling on his knees, hoping for mercy. He wanted to say something to justify himself about the cops, but Sang-mook started to open his mouth wider with his fingers. He tore his mouth open with indifference, not giving away any emotion. One of the guards called him over to look at something. His eyes widened in surprise at what he saw. On the table was a card that stood by itself. A guy with an umbrella was drawn on it. Sang-mook looked at it and said to himself, Bi Gwan Liat. On the table was a box filled with band-aids. A voice nearby said jokingly that they were now drug lords. The general looked at her and said that meant it was all true and they could stick to the original plan. Kyungsoo asked if the plan for the ambush had already been approved, to which the general confidently said yes. He picked up the walkie-talkie and said he would introduce him to one officer about to take part in the ambush. She is one of the few people he trusts. He coughed and said into the walkie-talkie for that person to come in. They both turned their gaze to the front door. The general told Kyungsoo to say hello to the member of the operation, KNPSOU member, Superintendent Kim Ah-hyun. The girl put her hand at her temple and addressed him as Sir. Kyungsoo also said hello to her without getting up from his seat, showing that he didn't care. The general introduced him and said that he was the senior police officer Kim Kyungsoo and invited her to sit next to him. The girl, seeing him, was surprised that he was a senior officer. She walked towards him, taking him by the chin to get a better look into his eyes. She said that the senior officer was sitting in the superintendent's office as if he was at home. She asked Kyungsoo if he was at home. He grudgingly replied that his feet hurt. The general told her that everything was fine and he should already get on with the plan. The girl replied that she didn't agree with such behavior. Crossing her arms on her chest and putting her foot on Kyungsoo's leg, she said that the senior officer should stand up now and that she doesn't like rude kids. She rudely told him again to stand up. Kyungsoo decided to see how far she could go for that and told her to make him. She asked him again what he just said. He replied that he didn't want to get up. He smirked and told her to try and get him to get up, calling her superintendent, as if to devalue her. He said that the words superintendent and senior officer both start with the letter C, so he didn't see much difference between the two. So let her stop making a big deal out of it. The girl looked at him with a threatening look and asked if he had just called her a salaga, adding that he meant it in a bad way. Kyungsoo glared at the girl. The general called the girl by name and asked her not to get involved. Suddenly, the girl took her foot away abruptly. Kyungsoo didn't expect it. She swung her foot at him. He looked at it questioningly and realized it was a kick. She was about to hit him by swinging her foot upwards while making a body turn. Kyungsoo looked at her with a surprised look before he could even react. He realized that she was using a Brazilian kick. He started trying to dodge sideways and thought that he was not Hwang Hee-jun. They were not on the same level. The girl, with anger in her eyes, called him a jerk. In her attempts to hit him, she asked him how he even had the nerve to dodge her punches. She put her foot on the floor and said that since that was the rules of his game, she said that she would grab him by force and threw herself at him with her arms out to the sides. Kyungsoo was amazed. She changed her grip in an instant and her legs were fast. She couldn't compare to Lee Sung-hyun. He clenched his hand into a fist, saying to himself that she might be useful to his plan. He gave her a fist to the chin. The girl averted her gaze upward. The office became quiet. Ah-hyun fell on his lap, holding her hands on his body while he sat on the couch. It happened quickly and unexpectedly. Kyungsoo mockingly told her that she was going to make him get up, so why did she lie down herself? The girl looked at him angrily. She swung her hand at him with words that he was a son of a bitch. The general calmly ate a candy bar and watched the whole thing, while Ah-hyun was hitting him with her hands and shouting for him to die. Kyungsoo dodged her and said that, as expected from a KNPSOU member, she was in great shape, which made the girl even angrier. She started calling him a freak, a scumbag, and kept waving her hands. The general, with a calm face, chewed his candy bar while saying that it was delicious. Everything quieted down. There was a glass of stationery on the table. The general said he would start describing the Phoenix operation on top of the Polonia. He read the information from a sheet of paper. He said that according to the answers, the last weekend of each month, the drug sales managers meet at headquarters, the last weekend of the month. That is about 15 days later. He said they would wait until the right time and the KNP Soyu team led by Kim Ah-hyun and senior officer Kim Kyungsoo squad would put the plan into action. Ah-hyun said she objected to the idea and how the information in the report could be trusted. The general calmly said that senior officer Kim Kyungsoo conducted the investigation. The girl grudgingly slammed her hands on the table and said it was nonsense. They were silent as fish when questioned. Kyungsoo told her to thank him for getting the information and to stop complaining, to which Ah-hyun aggressively told him to shut his mouth and called him a moron. She pointed her finger at him and asked him how dare he treat her like that. Kyungsoo asked what she would do to him. She clenched her hand into a fist in front of her and said she wouldn't believe it until she heard it with her own ears, so she would reinterrogate them, to which the general said no. He said reinterrogation was impossible, and Hyun shouted asking how come they are dead. Kyungsoo asked why they have such shitty security. The general said that they should prepare everything well anyway and they will see each other at the next meeting. He said everyone is free. The girl stood up from the couch leaning on the hand that was on the table and aggressively asked how they died. The general asked Kyungsoo to stay for a moment. He looked on with indifference. Ah-hyun grudgingly asked why he was here to stay. No one answered her question. The girl threw a rude look at Kyungsoo, leaving the office with a shout and asked what was going on. She stopped at the door while holding the handle. She turned around and warned Kyungsoo that she was a pro at shooting and to be careful because her gun was already aimed at his head. She pointed her finger at him. The door closed loudly. Kyungsoo looked towards the door and said that her head was not right. The general called out for his attention. He put a small transparent bag on the table with something in it and said that it was found in the interrogation room where they died. There was this card on the table in front of the dead Phoenix guards. The general asked Kyungsoo if this said anything, while he looked at this card with a dumbfounded look while saying nothing. On the card was a picture of a crane bird. The girl held the card in her hand, which had a guy with an umbrella on it. Phoenix looked at her with fear and panic in her eyes. Sang-mook said it was found in a place condemned by the cops. Dong-chul added that there was something wrong here and maybe we should report to Mr. Buddha. The girl immediately said no. She panicked and put her hands on her head, saying that Bi Queen's brother was dead and it couldn't be. Mr. Buddha would scold her if she told him such a stupid thing. She said it didn't make any sense, so she had to stick to the plan. She wondered why the cops missed Bi Queen's card. If it was him, she immediately started to push those thoughts away and said that it was nonsense and she should just stick to the plan. Otherwise the girl remembered the gun the monk wanted to shoot her with. Her eyes were filled with immense fear from those memories and realizing the fear of what could happen to her. She sat on the couch on her knees and held her head with her hands. She started screaming hard and the guys turned back around and asked her to bring Sanpei soon. The room was filled with a light smoke. It was coming from certain bowls. Next to Phoenix sat Sanpai and held her hand covering her eyes with her other hand. On the table were blue drug flowers. Phoenix quietly called out to Jo Sang-mook and Kim Dong-chul. They called back to her standing not far away. She ducked her eye and told them to just stick to the plan. Dong-chong told her that it was too dangerous. The cops were aware of everything now, and there were a couple more things to worry about. But Phoenix only called out quietly to Sang-pai. She asked her to help them. If she worried too much the plans might go awry. Sanpai mercifully agreed. She told the guys to come over to her. There were some leftover blue flowers on a napkin on the table. The guys happily held the same flowers on the napkins, which had been cleaned by Sunpai, so now they were fresh. They began to laugh lightly with pleasure. There were drug streaks on their faces. Dong-jong said that in this state, all excitement evaporates. Sang-mook added that everything will go right now. Standing in front of Phoenix said that they would stick to the plan. Kyungsoo stood outside in his sports uniform putting his hands on his hips. Jenhee stood in front of him also in her gym uniform and asked if the others had run away since they said they would stop by the hospital. Kyungsoo said that they are weaklings. Jenhee asked if she could rest since she was here alone, hoping he would agree. Kyungsoo moved closer to her, took his hands on her shoulders, looked her in the eyes and said that until the others come, he and her would be one-on-one, a kind of threat in his eyes. This would be a special secret training session. Jenhee looked at him a little apprehensively in anticipation of what he was about to do. Kyungsoo crossed his arms on his chest and said that she was terrible in uniform. Jenhee blurted out that she has a good body, to which Kyungsoo replied that she has nothing. No muscles, terrible stamina. He added that she's like a log and there's nothing to even praise her for. The girl was a little embarrassed. He said they would be sent on a mission soon, so she would most likely be the first to die there. The girl asked what kind of mission it was that she might die. Kyungsoo at first wondered who even let this fool become an officer, but after a while he found a perfectly decent explanation. He knew she was smart, but she turned out to be much smarter than he expected. As far as he knows, she remembers the numbers of all the restaurants in the area, for which she was nicknamed the walking delivery app. The guys at the police station were talking amongst themselves and laughing about how there's no way to order food now since that asshole Kim Kyungsoo took Jenhee. The chief who was standing in front of them turned around and rudely asked who it was that called Kyungsoo an asshole. The guy dutifully said no one. Kyungsoo pulled something out of his pocket and told Jenhee that if she didn't want to die, she should focus on her strengths and try not to waste time trying to hide her weaknesses. He handed her a baton and told her to imagine that it was a weapon when it was folded. Imagine it was a knife when it was folded. And imagine it was a blunt weapon when it was unfolded. He said he would be gentle with her so that she would learn to control her body properly and headed towards her. The girl was confused by his words. Kyungsoo poked her forehead with the baton and told her to memorize everything well. The girl immediately asked what she needed to memorize. He pressed the baton and said that she would find out soon. Jenhee started to panic and asked her to tell him what it was. He looked at her a little ominously and told her to wait and she would realize everything. The girl asked again what she should realize. The sun was shining brightly over the forest that was at the height of the city. Sunghyun and Heejun stood in bewilderment. Kyungsoo, without his jacket, with a baton in his hands, was sitting on the back of Jenhee, who was lying on the ground and whimpering. She raised her head at the guys and tearfully said that it was too cruel. The guys asked what he was doing to her. Kyungsoo asked if they really wanted to know. The guys didn't know what to say. He smiled and pointed two fingers in his direction and said with a smirk that they would soon figure it out for themselves. The guys were a little scared, asking that maybe they could survive without this information. A long time passed. Kyungsoo was chasing Jenhee with a baton. She was trying to run away, unable to fight back. The guys were also running away from him, and Sunghyun was crying as usual. The general was reviewing the reports, and Hyun was also training her special forces. And so 15 days later, a full moon shone in the night sky. The day of the operation, the Phoenix on top of the Polonia. The moon was completely round, illuminating the dark sky. The guys stood in their special police uniforms. Heejun said with self-pity that he had endured 15 days of hell. Sun Hyun told him that he didn't even want to remember it. Only Jenhee stood there with a disgruntled face as if she didn't care. She asked with a tired look what kind of mission was this, that they even attracted KNPSOU who were standing in front of them in the same special uniform. And Hen asked Kyungsoo standing next to her what could be behind those thickets they were all standing in front of. She asked if he was lying and if they didn't find anything. He was screwed. The guy said he wasn't lying to her. They wondered who Kyungsoo was. There was a dark tunnel in front of them. The girl warned them that they were on the spot. In front of its entrance, behind some bushes, two guys wearing the Phoenix mask were sitting and warming themselves by a small fire. Jenhee wondered in surprise what kind of weirdos with rooster heads they were. And Hen rushed forward with her pistol in hand. She swung it at one of these guys, hit them in the face guarding the entrance. The other guy got a little confused because it was unexpected. He pulled out a small, sharp knife. His frightened look fell down on the girl. She used a kick from her foot to his chin that made his mask fall off a bit. The guys looked on in utter shock with their mouths open. The guys were already lying unconscious on the ground. The girl was trying to contact someone on the radio. When she caught a signal with her interlocutor, she told him that two enemies had been successfully eliminated and they were starting the operation. Kyungsoo turned to Jenhee and said that this girl's form was good and called her to go. Jenhee was a little surprised at his words about Ah-han's physical form. They were about to go forward when suddenly the captain stopped them. She told them to stay put and follow those two, pointing at the masked guys, one of whom she put her foot on his head. The guys were surprised at her order. Kyungsoo pronounced that though she was good in uniform, she was dull-witted. And Han Na-humurno said that the idea of combining regular officers with KNPSOU was originally delusional. Jenhee got angry at her words about regular officers, which meant devaluing, and Hyun Seo angrily threw a glare at her and asked her that does a pathetic department employee dare to cross her. She said that she would let them go only because of the superintendent's order, but that she would let them stay out of the way so that they wouldn't get in the way. Jenhee was upset. Heejun put his hand on her shoulder to comfort her, and Kyungsoo repeated her words about them getting in the way. He told her with a sly smile that her team would be on their own from now on, since it would be better for them to work up a sweat, and Hen said happily that he finally listened to her orders. She turned to the team and said that they would be leaving now, and led the others with her. Kyungsoo stood with indifference. The steps in the tunnel led downward. They were all confidently heading towards their goal. Her team reached a closed door from which loud music could be heard, where 2 guards had been eliminated, where endless stairs and passageways stretched out. The team abruptly opened the door and rushed in en masse. Ah-hen had already shouted an order for everyone to put their hands behind their heads, but before she could finish she was silenced with shock. She didn't take her eyes off her eyes as she stared in shock at what was happening in the room, where the loud music was blaring. In the room were zombie-like people swaying back and forth, who had streaks on their faces that meant drugs in their blood, and Hen looked at it and didn't know what it was. The guy who was sitting on the balcony seeing the police officers said with a smirk that he knew it. It was Dong-chul who sat quietly, who said that this situation was inevitable. He had a strange premonition from the beginning. He picked up the microphone to relay the information, namely, an announcement to the club's visitors. Unexpected guests had broken into the club, who were trying to ruin the party, and for everyone successfully caught. And Hen was angry at his brazen statement. He said that for every person brought to him, he would give a pass. He smiled and went on to say that it would give them unlimited access to drugs for a month. The crowd of people under the influence of drugs rushed with arms out to the sides at the police. Ah-hen shouted to her boys. On her order, everyone raised their shields. Operation Phoenix on top of the Polonia was underway, and Hen yelled for everyone to raise their shields as the crowd ran screaming at them. The guys listened to her. There were 4 people in the front with shields and those without, with angry people running in the front. They started trying to remove the shields to get to the police. The cops were trying to hold them back as best they could, wondering where they got their strength from. Dong-chul was eating his blue candy and watching everything with a smile and said that they couldn't just shoot them as they would be in trouble after that. The captain shouted to her armed squad to put on their masks, and Hen pulled a gas bomb out of her pocket, throwing it up. The room immediately filled with smoke. It was tear gas that spread in the air. She shouted to the team to push them back. Ah-hen's eyes filled with surprise once again. The guy from the team said that the tear gas didn't work against them and they still continued to burst towards them like that. Dong-chul lightly waved one hand to get the gas away from him and said that their sense of euphoria was much stronger than the pain. Did they naively think it would work? He told the radio to collect the drugs and get Sang-pai out the back door. The team was trying to fight them when from above Dong-chul was standing in front of them not paying attention, and Hyun suddenly noticed someone behind them. Someone was heading in their direction. The guy jumped up with a burst of speed heading towards Dong-chul. While kicking his feet in the air, he stepped on the heads of the team. Ah-hyun shouted who let him go. Dong-chul, with a candy in his mouth and a walkie-talkie in his hands, noticed through his side vision that someone was approaching him. Turning his gaze towards him, he widened his eyes in surprise. The guy was approaching him with a confident look. It was a guy unfamiliar to him wearing a special forces uniform. Dong-chul eliminated his startled look. That one jumped towards him, creating a loud bang. He jumped over the handrail, flying past Dong-chul. From the look in his eyes, one could tell that he definitely wasn't expecting this. He looked at the broken radio and twirled it in his hands. The guy threw a sharp look at him and said a little wistfully that he had underestimated him. Unlike the boss, the subordinates must have received special training. Dong-chul looked over and asked what he meant. He looked down at his men. The policeman was yelling about pushing them around by force, and Hyun was shouting her orders in an attempt to somehow defeat them. Dong-chul looked in their direction and wondered if they really thought force would work against this crowd. The unfamiliar guy called out his name. The guy turned to him with a slightly concerned look, his eyes filled with panic. The guy quickly walked past him, making a cut on his body. He looked down to see what was going on when Ah-hyun suddenly noticed him. Dong-chul started screaming in pain. His blood splattered red on the floor and wall. The guy roughly took him by the neck, which made it even more painful. He leaned him against the wall and mockingly asked him why he turned away, asking if he didn't seem strong enough. Said it wasn't a fatal wound so he could take it easy since he had promised not to kill anyone if possible. He pointed the sharp blade of the knife at him, pressed his hand against the wall, not letting him get out. He pressed the knife down on it. Dong-chul started screaming in terrible pain. His eyes turned red as he tried his best to bear it. The guy said he wasn't going to take his life, ordered him to stand still against the wall. A red bloodstain had already appeared on the guy's sleeve, and he glared angrily at the guy. He stepped back. Dong-chul breathed out a sigh of relief and asked who he was. He answered who he knew without giving a definite answer. Pulling off his gas mask, the foot of one of the policemen pushed someone's body to the floor. It was Ah-hyun who kicked the last person left to the floor, saying that she had finally gotten rid of them. They were all lying on the floor with no signs of being conscious. She headed upstairs and told everyone to follow her. Suddenly she changed her face in surprise. There was a knife sticking out of the wall with blood splattered around it. Dong-chul looked at his hands, which were all covered in band-aids and streaks from them. He stood above Ah-hyun and said that the bandages had stopped the bleeding, but his condition was not better. She asked him how he was able to lift his arm in such a condition. He asked her who he was and if he was from the KNP-SOU. The girl thought about his question for a moment and said she was curious. The guy was walking down the hallway, and behind him on the floor were the dead bodies of the guys with Phoenix masks. He yelled for Phoenix to come out. The guards couldn't stand in her defense since the stranger had robbed them of that opportunity, just like the people the KNP-SOU team had just fought. And Hyun and his team pointed their weapons at Dong-chul and told him to surrender. If he went down they would help them. Dong-chul looked at them and said how many officers there were. He held on to the iron handrail with his hands. He said he hadn't seen such a gathering since he left the special unit. She looked at him in surprise and said that he was just. Dong-chul said with a menacing smile that he was glad to meet them and called them his disciples. The girl was shocked by his words. He took out a gun from his pocket, said his name and that he was from Squad 29 and asked what squad they were from, and Hen immediately gave the order to open fire with their weapons. A lot of bullets started flying in different directions. Hearing this, the guys who were outside looked at the entrance of the dark tunnel. Hee-jun asked them if Kyungsoo was sure to handle it since he had just heard the gunshots. Sung-hyun reminded them that Kyungsoo had ordered them to wait here. Jen-hee added that she didn't like this whole situation. She started to express her displeasure, asking why they took them in the first place if they're going to use them as cannon fodder. Someone wearing white men's shoes stealthily appeared behind them while they were talking about why they were doing these secret operations in the first place. Jen-hee was saying that they had suffered a lot without noticing that someone much larger than their size was behind them. Suddenly they realized there was someone behind them and directed their gaze upwards. They turned towards him, fear red on their faces. The guy asked what they were doing here. His face was indifferent and at the same time expressing anger called them fucking cops. He asked the guys what they were doing there. It was San-mook, who with a disgruntled face called them fucking cops. The guys quickly blew up with a sweep, started running farther away. After running away a bit, Jen-hee pulled out a stun gun and pointed the electric two blue-colored wires at them. Sang-mook at this time stood with a completely calm face. He reached out his hand towards those wires, with his strength abruptly pulled down and snipped off the taser itself. There was indifference on his face, as if he had no other emotion. The taser right in front of Jen-hee's shocked gaze shattered into pieces. She took the hand she was holding it in and said it tingled a little. Sang-mook threw the wires on the ground that remained in his hand, said MS. Phoenix is capable of more. South Korea has strict rules on the use of firearms. It is a hot topic in the country, and the police are no exception, with incidents of a police officer using a gun occurring no more than once a year. So police officers are trained to use a safer weapon, a stun gun, or rubber bullets. Dong-chul was sipping his candy without stopping, his face covered in blood. He said to use whatever they wanted. He sat at the table as the bullets flew at him. He calmly said that bullets like that could leave a dent, thus mocking them. As the police shot at him, Dong-chul wondered what the table was made of that they couldn't destroy it. Hyun shouted that this would not do and they should switch to live ammunition. The team obediently accepted her order. Dong-chul sat and listened to what the police were telling him, namely that Kim Ah-hyun from the KNP-SOU was talking to him and the next round would be with bullets. She yelled to him that he should put up a standoff and surrender as he needs urgent medical attention, otherwise he will die. Dong-chul, not trying to save himself, sat in a pool of his blood. He said it's better to die. He asked that they offer him the rest of his life to rot in jail without access to drugs, and Hen was angry that he wouldn't give up. She asked him if drugs were more important than life, to which he replied that his life had been turned upside down when he'd gotten drugs on one of the KNP-SOU missions. Leaning back on the table, holding a gun in his hand with a tired face, he said that he took advantage of his position to scour the area for the best product. But with time his body began to get used to it and after a while the drugs stopped pleasing him. At that time he was sitting near a garbage can not knowing what to do, but suddenly someone turned to him. In front of him stood Phoenix with a blue candy on a stick. Behind her back stood San-mook and San-pai. Licking the candy, said she heard that his body had developed a resistance to drugs. She held out her hand to him with the candy, saying that this candy was made of the best they had. The guy looked surprised. She leaned over a little and sweetly asked him if he wanted to taste it. Dong-chul licked it off Phoenix's hands. His eyes opened wide with surprise and pleasure. He was covered in drug stripes. It was amazing to him. A smile spread across his face from pleasure. Phoenix folded her arms across her chest and asked how he liked it, knowing it was fine for him. She said that if he agreed to team up with her, she'd get something cooler. Dong-chul, happily with a candy in his mouth, said he would do whatever she told him to do, and the girl said that was fine, but she asked him to promise not to eat more than one a day or he would get sick. Dongchul sat at the overturned table and thought that if he was going to die, there was no point in promising. He realized he had lost too much blood. He took 5 more of these candies out of his pocket, greedily stuffed them all into his mouth and started chewing, while saying that the only thing that hurt was that he couldn't eat anymore. It was even more painful than death. The police officers loaded their guns with bullets and prepared to shoot. And Hen said, "We'll have to have a shootout." Her eyes filled with incomprehension at what she saw. A hand appeared from behind the wall with a gun ready to fire. A finger pulled the trigger. Dongchul was holding this gun and aiming it at the wall in front of him. The bullet hit the wall and flew towards Ah Hyun. The girl ducked down and luckily the bullet flew over her. She realized Dongchul's plan. He shoots at the wall first, then the bullet bounces off in the right direction. He stood up and pointed his gun at them. He started yelling at them while they were standing. With a crazy smile, red eyes and stripes on his face, he threateningly told them to give their commander a lavish funeral. A bullet flew out of the gun. It flew past Kyungsoo. The guys in Phoenix masks shot at him in cold blood without stopping. Kyungsoo took the hand of one of them with a sharp movement. At this moment, the guy let out a burst of fire. He was in an effort to free his hand, but failing to prevail, his gun fell out on the floor. Kyungsoo had time to catch it. With one hand he held the guy's arm, and with the other he immediately shot him in the leg above the knee as soon as he had the gun. The guy immediately fell to the floor. Kyungsoo at this time ran up to the others and fired a few shots at them as well, denying them the opportunity to attack him. He put his finger on the trigger, putting the gun in the mouth of one of the guys. Without regret he shot him in the mouth, blood splattering in all directions. Sunpee was standing in front of the room waiting for him to come in. The guy was heading towards those doors while half-fire guys lay lifelessly behind his back. He took hold of the door handles with his hands and pushed forward, swinging it open. A girl was already standing in front of him waiting. The boy looked at her, and she said she'd been wondering where the noise was coming from, and it was his doing, adding that she'd heard a lot about him from Miss Phoenix. She was going to visit him herself, but he was quicker. The guy asked her if they got his present while closing the door behind him. The girl's face changed as she realized he was talking about the Phoenix card. She was in complete amazement. Sunpee asked who he was. He grinned and said that he often hears this question, but he doesn't get bored of it, so it's time to remember the good old days. And Hen continued to shoot. The bullets hit the table where Dongchul was hiding. They pierced the surface of the table, leaving holes. Dongchul was hit by several bullets at once and his back was bleeding. And Hyung was yelling to the team not to lower the guns. Suddenly she saw something. Dongchul leaned on the iron rail and his eyes turned red. The guy from their team saw that the table he was hiding behind had fallen from the balcony in front of them. The corner of the table hit the shield of one of the guys. He pushed it aside with his shield, and Han held the gun aimed at him and yelled that at this rate he would die. Dongchul fell off the balcony and started running towards them. The team tried to stop him. The guy was holding on as hard as he could so he wouldn't break the shield, but Dongchul kept breaking closer to him. Blood rushed out of the guy's throat. His body fell beside Ah Hyun who was squatting behind him. Dongchul held the gun he had just fired near his face and said he shouldn't raise the shield without thinking. He asked what they thought he was capable of since he was barely breathing. He burst through the policeman closer to the girl, and Hen looked at him angrily. He said he was close enough to her now. Standing right in front of her pointing his gun at her, he said with a smile on his face, she didn't want to hit her comrades after all. He put his finger on the trigger. Suddenly, the girl jerked from her seat. Dongchul didn't expect her action. She swung her foot at his groin. He flew backwards. While doing so, he screamed, and Hen immediately picked up his gun. Before he could fall down, he was hit by many bullets at once. He fell to the floor bloodied. Ah Hen shouted to the boys to check on their comrade who had been shot. The guy crouched down beside him and said he was dead, and Hen was hoping he was alive. Suddenly someone called out. She looked in the direction where the voice was coming from. Dongchul said with a smile that he wasn't dead yet and threw a smoke grenade in their direction. Ah Hyun looked at the place where it fell. She shouted for everyone to disperse as there was an explosion. Everything was in thick smoke. One of the team tried to see something, but it was useless. Suddenly blood spurted from the center of his forehead. One of them asked what was the matter and where the shooting was coming from. Ah Hen turned to the side to try and see it. She thought to herself, what if these idiots keep shouting like that? The voice was mocking them, telling them how pathetic it was that they were panicking over their comrade's death. Time was passing. Equipment was getting better and people were getting dumber. It was telling them that they were too weak and had no experience at all. Dongchul pointed the gun at them and told them to take it as a lesson, called them his students and pressed the button. He told them that the price of the lesson would be their lives. Another man from the team fell down when he was hit by a bullet. The boys didn't know what to say. Dongchul disappeared behind thick smoke. Someone started firing a cannon. The guy stood with frightened eyes. He looked around and asked where the bullets were coming from. Shots rang out in the clouds of smoke and immediately the body of a breathless comrade fell. They continued in panic asking questions from where he was firing. Blood splattered on the walls. Bullets were flying from the gun. On the floor lay the hand that held the gun. And Hen lay face down on the floor and asked herself if she was going to die because she was scared for her life. She raised her gaze higher. In the smoke was the silhouette of a man. She wondered if it was friend or foe. Across from her, she saw the gun Dongchul was holding in her hand. Fear immediately enveloped her. She continued to stare without moving. Dongchul was sitting against the wall with the gun in his hands. There was a pool of blood underneath him. She stood up a little. Dongchul was with his eyes closed and his head down. She wondered if he was dead. She got to her feet as the feeling of impending death gradually receded. Having to inevitably face reality, the girl looked around where the dead bodies of her comrades lay. She looked at one of her team. His head was lying in a pool of blood. Dongchul also showed no signs of life. All the bodies of her comrades were lying in a pool of blood. She immediately went into a panic. She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was the first time in her life that she felt such fear and despair. She only managed to squeeze out a couple of frightened moans. Suddenly someone screamed. She turned her head to see who it was. It was a guy in a blue shirt running. It was Sangmook chasing after the guys who were running away from him and shouting that nothing worked against him. He shouted at them that they were cowardly rats. Jen he shouted in tears that she was fucked and that this man was impenetrable, adding that Kim Kyungsoo was a fucking liar. Bi Gwan's secret training was pretty simple. He told his slaves all about the most important human organs. With rubber bullets, he taught them to aim for the solar plexus, back of the head, groin, and joints. With pointed weapons, he trained them to hit the places with the most blood vessels. Kyungsoo was sitting on Jen he with the guys lying next to him. He told them that if they had to face the enemy on a mission, they should aim at the places he showed them. Jen he screamed that her lower back was hurting, said that after such a blow, many people get hit. The guys lay on the ground with an exhausted look. Kyungsoo sitting on Jenhee's back added that of course there are exceptions, like Sangmook, who the guys had all three guns at once. They looked at him with astonishment. Sangmook just mumbled and said funny, and now the guys were running away from him. Jenhee turned to the squad leader. She asked him to help them. Suddenly she stopped crying and a look of confusion appeared in her eyes. Running inside they saw the dead bodies of their team members and the usual drug addicts. Sunghyun covered his mouth with his hand from the horror he saw. He jabbed his finger forward and said it was in front of their eyes. He angrily shouted what was wrong with them. They saw Ahyun who was sitting on her knees surrounded by corpses not paying attention to anything. He asked if they were all dead. Sangmook appeared behind them and said that Dongchul did a good job of getting rid of all the trash. Sangmook looked questioningly at Dongchul. He was sitting still. He immediately changed his face and addressed him by name again. Kyungsoo looked at Sangpai with words that it was the former Miss Phoenix, asking where the new Miss Phoenix was hiding now. The girl repeated back to him that she had just asked who he was, to which he replied for her to guess since she was far from being a retard in such things and should have figured it out by now. She giggled, covering her mouth with her hand, and said she wasn't sure and could only say that he was an interesting person who said very interesting things, and if they had met under different circumstances, she would have poured tea and talked. She started to take something out of her bra, carefully pulling out a band-aid. Kyungsoo immediately called her a drug-addicted mutt and swung his fist at her. He hit her in the face. Blood spurted out of the girl's mouth and her body was thrown back. Kyungsoo added that she was also acting friendly, but he knew she had quietly pulled out a band-aid. Sangpai wiped the blood from her mouth with her hand while holding the band-aid in her other hand. Kyungsoo said he should have Soto attack and swung his foot at her again. He kicked her hand with the band-aid in it so that it flew apart, saying that while she was wasting time trying to put it on, the girl screamed. Her face was angry and her nose was bleeding a little. She opened her mouth to scream, but there he saw a blue pill. The guy pulled his hand to her face. He forcefully pressed her cheeks to keep her mouth closed where the blue pill was. He said it was too obvious. Reaching his hand out to get it, he asked if it was even normal for her to keep the pill in her mouth all day. Kyungsoo took the pill out of her mouth. He took her by the throat with his hand. At this time the girl was trying to break free with her legs. She grabbed his hand that he was holding her with. It was an attempt to wring her hands without using drugs. Kyungsoo put her with one hand on the table next to her. She hit her head, told her she thought she really had it. She lay on the table while Kyungsoo held her by the throat. He told her to tell him where this bird was hiding. Asked what's the point of protecting this cowardly rat that hides her face when her comrades are dying. Sun Pai replied that Ms. Phoenix is not a coward. Kyungsoo confirmed her words and added that she is just a dependent wimp. He said that if she didn't name the location, but suddenly he felt something fly into his back. He turned back. His look changed to one of surprise. There were two guys and a girl standing at his door who were drugged. The girl with band-aids on her face told him he was a bad guy. Kyungsoo looked at her questioningly. Sunpai addressed her as honey and told her they were too late. Didn't she tell them to come if they heard a noise? Kyungsoo had her by the throat. Molluska headed in his direction and told him not to touch her. She ran at him with her knife outstretched. Kyungsoo just stepped aside so she wouldn't hit him. When he got near Kyungsoo, he hit her on the shoulder with his fist. She fell to the ground and dropped the knife from her hands. Two guys started running at Kyungsoo with knives. He hit them without much effort. They fell to the floor. Sunpai laughed behind his back and asked him what he was going to do next. She said that the drug addict was now on drugs since she had managed to put a band-aid on herself. The two boys were lying on the floor. Kyungsoo asked if Ms. Phoenix gave her permission to touch the innocent ones. He turned to her and continued, touching innocent children. Sangpai with red eyes replied, who knows? Near Kyungsoo's feet was a knife that one of those kids had just dropped. He said that wouldn't do. Stepping on the knife with his foot, it flew into the air and he caught it. He swung it around. Sangpai looked at him with a smile and said he was done. Kyungsoo looked at her with the knife in his hands with a slightly scared expression on his face. Outside, the wind was blowing the green leaves off the tree. Sangpai sat with her head resting on her palm. She watched from a small stone mountain as Bi Gwan stood with a knife in front of some guy who was kneeling. A monk came up to her and asked her opinion. Looked down and asked if this child would be the new Bi Gwan. The boy was standing with a bloody knife in his hands. The girl replied that she didn't know. He seems to be stronger than the first Bi Gwan, but he can't finish him off. She said he does look like him, but it's not that clear-cut. The monk told her she was wrong. Her brain is melted from the drugs, so it's no wonder she didn't notice. The monk said he could easily kill him. He just doesn't want to. Sun P said it works out. He's just taking him out, just bullying a highly ranked fighter. Monk said it was a child when he first came here. That day as a little boy standing in the rain. All the children had already been killed by the first generation Bi Gwan, except for him, who was looking at the pile of dead children the guy standing next to him had killed. The monk put his hand on her shoulder and told her to look again. The girl realized everything. The countless scars left by this child. Wasn't it a miracle? Like willow leaves. Who else but him fit the role of Bi Gwan? At this time he was standing by the river, and next to him lay the dead old Bi Gwan whose time was already up. Sangpai seemed to be flying in her thoughts, imagining Kyungsoo in his special uniform. Suddenly, she realized that this was it. Kyungsoo's eyes made it all clear. She realized that this was definitely it. Kyungsoo ran towards her swinging his knife. It's definitely Bi Gwan, the guy from the umbrella card. The light bulb was on in the room. Sangpai was bleeding. There were many different cuts on her. She opened her eyes a little. Kyungsoo put her foot in the chest area. He said he asks one last time where Phoenix is hiding. She said he would kill her even if he told her. Right? Kyungsoo said he is, but death will be painless. Sangpai under the influence of drugs smiled a little and kept quiet. As soon as the first generation Phoenix known as Sanpai descended from the November Polonia, the Buddha placed her fate in the hands of the new Phoenix. He stood with another girl, in front of Sanpai, who was sitting on his lap. When the full moon rises again, translated the ceremony of passing on the title, ending with the death of the representative of the previous generation. The guy stood in the forest near various animals. But the new Miss Phoenix did not kill her predecessor. She sat in the chair feeling her position. In front of her was a kneeling bound Sangpai. Phoenix held a drinking glass in her hands and asked why she tried to poison her. She asked Sunpai how much poison she thought she had swallowed. She hoped she wouldn't notice. She let her live and she tried to kill her. She asked why. She quietly asked if she hated her. Sunpai replied that she had no reason to love her. Phoenix wondered why. She held a glass in her hand and started crying, asking why everyone despised her so much. She said that they tried to kill her because she was weaker. She fought for her life to wait for the full moon, and now they hate her because of drugs. Sanpai looked at her and heard her. She said that they shouldn't despise her so much. They had gone through the same hardships. Phoenix got up from the couch. She walked over to Sangpai and said that if she drank the contents in the glass, what she had in her glass right now, she should love her. Sangpai looked at her with surprised eyes. Phoenix asked if she agreed. She stood with an empty glass and happily said she drank it all. Instead of tears, blood flowed from her eyes. She asked with hope in her eyes if she had reformed and asked if she liked her more now. Phoenix started tugging on her shoulders and asked her to answer when she was the one who was only thinking about her survival. Seeing Ms. Phoenix in tears, who was lying at her feet hugging her. Sangpai felt for the first time what they call love. Sangpai was lying on the floor and Kyungsoo's leg was on her. She was saying that could she risk that one's life. Smiling with tears in her eyes, said who she first felt the feeling of love for. Kyungsoo looked at her and said that since that was her final answer, she was finished, so he slit her throat. He started to leave and said that he would have to interrogate the other bastards. He heard Sangpai say something else about Miss Phoenix. She said Phoenix would still come back here. Started coughing, choking on blood. Said she was also measuring the children lying next to her. Tears streamed down her bloody face. She asked him not to kill her and addressed him by the name of Bi Gwan. He turned around and looked at her. There was a band-aid on the girl's chest. There was also a red patch on her neck. She was riding a motorcycle with a helmet on. Kyungsoo headed for the exit with the words that everything depended on the actions of this lousy girl. Sang-mook shouted the name of the dead Dong Chul. Jen, he called out to the captain. Sang-mook ran up to the dead friend's body and Jen he to the captain and was telling her to pull herself together. She slapped her and told her to pull herself together in the end. Jen he shouted to the guys to bring her to her senses. He Jun looked at one point and called out to Jen he. She turned back. A furious Sang-mook was standing there. He had a lot of band-aids on his hands. He started running towards them. Jen he yelled for them to stop him. He swung at them. He hit two guys at once. He immediately lunged at Jen he and Ah Hyun as they fell to the floor. They sat in an embrace on the floor. There was another policeman next to them. Sang-mook said he was going to tear them apart. His eyes were red in color. He agreed he would tear them into little pieces. He reached out his hand towards them. Suddenly, blood spurted out. Sang-mook looked at the place where the blood was coming from. His hand was wounded and someone was running after him in a police uniform. Kyungsoo slowed down a bit by running his feet on the floor while Sang-mook held onto his sore arm in an attempt to reduce the feeling. Jen he shouted his name. Kyungsoo heard her call his name. He looked at Sang-mook with knife in hand and said only over his dead body, saying that this girl will still be useful. Sang-mook turned around on him. Someone talked about it being a death blow. On the floor with his head down sat the dead Dong Chul. Kyungsoo was looking at him with a sharp look. He wondered if they were just scattered like that. Noticing the dead body of the guy from the team, Kyungsoo thought about how he was underestimating as Sang-mook swung at him. He hit his fist against something hard. He realized that he didn't hit Kyungsoo. Kyungsoo put up a shield and said it must have hurt a bit. Sang-mook started jumping from foot to foot and holding his sore arm. Kyungsoo called the three policemen over. He told them to deal with that minnow and pointed his finger to the far corner. There were children lying there with band-aids on them. Kyungsoo picked up a gun from the floor, said he would finish the rest. Suddenly, his gaze became surprised. Sang-mook put two people who were drugged in front of him and said to shoot as he himself was hiding behind them. Kyungsoo said he could rest assured and started shooting. The bullet flew towards the girl Sang-mook was behind. Suddenly her head fell down and the bullet grazed Sang-mook's shoulder. He threw those two on the floor face down and he started screaming in pain and holding his hand on his wounded shoulder. Kyungsoo told him to calm down as he won't kill him. He said that everyone was dead so he would have to at least let him live. Sang-mook questioned what he was saying. He started attacking him yelling that he was a son of a bitch. His leg, above the knee, spurted blood in two places at once. He screamed in pain again. Kyungsoo told one of the policemen to report back to base that they were returning. The policeman with a slightly scared face accepted his order. Kyungsoo looking at the dead bodies thought it would be easy, but he was wrong. He had misjudged the situation. He had high expectations for his team, but he also had high expectations for Ah Hyun, and she just blew it. Jen he turned to Kyungsoo and told him if he could tie him up, pointing his finger at the injured Sang-mook. He thought about how compared to these three, Ah Hyun is just a god. He must have just overestimated her. He turned his attention to something. A motorcycle appeared above them. On it sat a girl wearing a helmet, so you couldn't see her face. She abruptly slowed down right in front of Kyungsoo. He immediately pointed a gun at her. The girl started to turn the motorcycle backwards. She hit Kyungsoo with it. She started to ride, and behind her there was an explosion, and everything around her was blown apart. She made a circle and thus turned the motorcycle around and braked. Sang-mook looked at her and said, "Miss." The girl grabbed her helmet to take it off. Taking it off, Sang-mook said her nickname was Miss Phoenix. The red helmet was in her hands with dark gloves. Hu Jun yelled it was that crazy bitch. Jen he called out to Kyungsoo. Phoenix turned to Sang-mook and told him to gather the others and follow her. Finding an escape route was taking longer than she thought, and if she was reprimanded and finished. Sang-mook sadly told her that there was no one left alive but him. Phoenix interjected. A male voice answered her that she had heard. She turned her head to see a dead Dongchul sitting against the wall, and not far away was Kyungsoo. He said everyone is dead. Dongchul is dead. Sangpai is also dead. Phoenix got really angry. She gripped the handlebars of the motorcycle tightly. She put her hand in the inside pocket of her jacket, swung the blue flowers at him, and said she'd kill him with her own hands. Kyungsoo laughed lightly at her, mockingly saying how scary it was. It was raining in the gray sky. On a rock sat Bi Gwan with a bandaged arm. Someone approached him calling him bro. He threw a glance to the side. In front of him stood a cute girl. She sat down next to him and said that she heard he was scolded for disobeying Lord Buddha. The girl asked if he was alright. Bi Gwan looked at her scratched hand. He immediately asked if she was okay. The girl only laughed and said she was fine and it was her own fault for being so weak. She said that Mr. Buddha had said that he was in charge of them and she was glad that he had been appointed to this role. The boy was silent in response. She said she was jealous because he got the promotion and the name. And the name Bi Gwan sounds cool. Asked his opinion if she could get the name too. The guy said he wanted a lot. The girl said she couldn't predict. Said she heard everyone's relationship at the top is terrible and if she ever gets there. The guy looked at her. She asked if he would forget about their friendship, asking him to promise. Now this Phoenix girl was throwing blue flowers at him. They flew by him. One of them touched his finger. There was a small explosion. Kyungsoo covered his nose with his mask. He realized it was a drug smoke grenade. Blue smoke spread out. It wasn't particularly explosive, but it narrowed his field of vision considerably. Kyungsoo said his arm was a little numb, but he could still move it as a motorcycle started coming at him, with Phoenix sitting behind the wheel. She came flush beside him, abruptly turned him around in front of her. She asked how much longer he was going to run. A look of surprise appeared in her eyes. She saw that Kyungsoo was running somewhere. She took the wheel and said did he really think she couldn't? She started driving toward him up the stairs that led upstairs where Kyungsoo was running. The doors were open. Then Kyungsoo comes running out of them, leaving blue smoke behind him. Behind him, Phoenix rode out on her motorcycle. Suddenly she saw something. There were dead guys with Phoenix masks lying on the floor. Standing beside them was Kyungsoo. He looked at her and told her to test him. The girl threw an angry look at him. She went in different directions going around the dead bodies. There was anger in her eyes at Kyungsoo. She looked into the empty hallway. She heard him yell at her that she was a good driver. She looked up and there was Kyungsoo, who had caught his finger on the ceiling tiles. Suddenly she saw him jump toward her. He lightly grabbed her head with his hands. He elbowed her sharply and began to choke her. Phoenix tried to pull his hands away. She took hold of the steering wheel, drove forward hoping Kyungsoo would get off her back. He asked what she was trying to accelerate to throw him off. Said she had forgotten to put her helmet on. Put his arms around her neck harder said. They fell off the bike and rolled on the floor. Kyungsoo grabbed his lower back with his hand. He started to get to his feet and said he wouldn't do it a second time. Phoenix was sitting on her knees on the floor not far away. She yelled out who he was. Said that if it wasn't for him everything would have gone according to plan. He replied that he couldn't remember when exactly it happened, but at some point. Standing across from her he continued that she started blaming him for all her troubles when she was younger. She followed him everywhere and followed any instructions. He said that it wasn't him she should blame. The girl immediately shouted for him to stop talking nonsense. She asked again who he was. The guy said he was Bi Gwan. He again confidently repeated that he was Bi Gwan. Phoenix looked at him in disbelief. She said he was talking nonsense. The guy calmly said her name. He told her to turn herself in to the police. The girl looked at him in surprise. He said he was going to kill her, but she was in charge of the capital so she could provide information about the deal. He was told to bring her in alive. He stood in front of her and kept telling her to narrate all the horrors she had to go through because of that bastard, and to provide evidence to prove he was guilty. If she agreed, she would stay alive. The girl scoffed slightly. Then she started laughing out loud at the fact that Bi Gwan still had a secret apprentice left yet, and it was some cop. He replied that they all knew perfectly well that he had no apprentices. He asked getting to the top and she started following him. Phoenix looked at him and didn't answer anything. He said that she naively thought that he would not notice the shadow following him on every mission. She didn't answer anything, just looked at him and remained silent. He said that there were only two people in the Hwaguxa clan who hated the monk, him and her. Then why had she changed so much? Phoenix became angry. She yelled for him to shut his mouth and brother Bi Gwan is dead. She tearfully shouted that Mr. Buddha even showed her his corpse. He said she would be next if she disobeyed. He replied that of course that was hard to believe. She started laughing and said that it seems that there was something Bi Gwan didn't tell his disciple about. The moment when Phoenix was still a teenager. In the rain, she said that she had heard that everyone's relationship at the top was terrible. Bi Gwan was standing there remembering it. He was younger, sitting there listening to her, and she said if she ever got there. Phoenix put her hands on her face and said she hated Bi Gwan much more than Mr. Buddha. The girl on the rock asked him if he knew about their friendship. She said to promise. Phoenix lunged at the guy. He already had his fists ready. The girl wanted to hit him with her hand, but he managed to be first and kicked her in the side of her stomach. He hit the smoke bombs that were in her pocket with his foot. There was an explosion. Everything filled in blue smoke. Kyungsoo was wearing a protective mask. Phoenix deeply inhaled the smoke and enjoyed it, saying it felt so good. She kicked her foot into Kyungsoo's stomach. She lunged at him with her fists, saying that whether it was a headache, toothache, or even bloody wounds, drugs will get rid of everything. She was getting closer and closer to Kyungsoo, saying that even in the worst situations when she felt terrible, she pointed her fist at him, punching him in the face, while yelling that drugs help with everything in the world. Little pieces of it flew apart in the blue smoke. She looked up with a happy expression on her face. Being on drugs, she saw the world blurred and everything in blue colors. She kept saying that it was all great, wonderful, beautiful. She fell on the floor and was already staring at the ceiling with no strength. The drugs used as a medicine cure. However, what is used as a drug distorts the perception of reality. She opened her red-colored eyes slightly and looked at Kyungsoo and asked how he was even standing on his feet. He was standing in front of her. Drugs change the perception of reality, but reality itself does not change. Suddenly the girl started screaming that she was in pain because of the drugs. They make everything worse. The girl held her hands on her head and screamed. She didn't understand what was wrong. She won after all, and this can't be happening. Rising to her knees desperately, she said she needed more. Kyungsoo called her name. She looked up at him. He watched her calmly and said it was a disgrace. Better to just give up. The girl looked at him with panic and tears in her eyes. She wondered if she was a disgrace. Suddenly rushed to Kyungsoo screaming that he didn't know anything. The girl stopped when he replied that he knew absolutely everything, while holding several band-aids in his hand at once. He slapped his hand on hers and the patches flew upwards. He added that he knew better than anyone else. The girl looked at the patches that had scattered. She started trying to catch them with her hands, screaming that they were her drugs. He swung his fist at her and told her to stop and just turn herself in to the police. The girl was bleeding from the blow to her face. Kyungsoo looked at her with a threatening look and said she would only embarrass herself more. In the hallway were Phoenix's words that she was in pain. She sat on the floor in front of Kyungsoo and told him to give her more drugs. He sat down in front of her and said if she promised to turn herself in to the police he would give her a dose. She looked at him and said he'd rather kill her. Mr. Buddha's anger is worse than death. Kyungsoo took off his gas mask and said that Senpai asked for a favor. Said she asked to let Phoenix live. The girl remained silent. She said that if he really was Bi Gwan's brother, there was no way he would get rid of Senpai. He could get enough information out of her. He replied that Senpai touched the kids. The girl didn't expect that. He said that judging from her reaction, she's not aware of it. He asked if she now understood why she had to be killed. Phoenix replied that he was still continuing to impersonate Bi Gwan. He stood up and said that if that bastard was the only problem for her, then she didn't have to worry. Looking at her said that he would finish this bastard off too. The girl looked at him, asked if he was talking about Lord Buddha and started laughing loudly. She shouted to him that even Bi Gwan died at the hands of Lord. Does he naively think he can kill the Lord? The one replied that there was nothing left of his real body, because of the long years of hard training and abuse he had to endure as a child. Thanks to this he became stronger. The body remembers everything and wounds are no exception. And the mission that hammered the final nail in his coffin was Special Operation True Religion. Phoenix listened to him carefully, listened with a surprised look that he had suffered terribly then. She remembered that herself. After all, he clenched his hand into a fist, said that his new body was different. He said that it had only been subjected to careful training, which now allowed him to feel free. There was not a single scar on his body and the effects of abuse, which spoke of its perfect condition. It was absolutely perfect. He thought he was lucky, but if he had gotten Jen He's body. Mentally she asked him what was wrong with her body. He replied that it was scary to even imagine the consequences. Phoenix looked at him carefully as he told her that if he finally got used to the new body and continued to train, he would be able to. He confidently said that he could kill the monk. The girl looked at him with a bit of fear in her eyes. She was saying that if images from the past began to pop up in her mind. She asked if he was really Bi Gwan. He answered yes, and now she has to make her choice. Surrender to the police. Phoenix looked at him with tears. Or die right now. A light was on in the hallway. She sat on the floor on her knees with her head down in front of him. The lights were on in the room where their teen was dead. Party light balls hanging from the ceiling. The policeman asked Jen-hee if Kyungsoo was sure she could handle it. She said sure. We should gather everyone and get out of here. Help will arrive in half an hour. Sung-min looked the other way and called out to Jen-hee. The injured Sang-mook was sitting on the floor. Sung-min asked if they could give him first aid since he had lost too much blood. Sang-mook said that if they touched him with a finger, he would kill them. Jen-hee came over and crouched down beside him and said that she would do it with her fingertip then. Sang-mook looked at her. He asked her to take out a band-aid from his pocket and stick it on his body. Jen-hee looked at him surprised. She asked what kind of nonsense he is saying. Sang-mook already shouted for her to do it faster. Jen-hee said that they are drugs. Then how can she give them to someone who is addicted? Suddenly she heard someone say yes. She turned her head to look. Two silhouettes were visible in the aisle. One of them with tattoos on his chest said that drugs are for. Sang-mook and Jen-hee looked in his direction. This guy also had tattoos on his legs. He continued that drugs were for scumbags. These were the brothers of Lespedesia. Sang-mook looked at them with bloody clothes. Jen-hee asked who it was. One of the guys started yelling Sang-mook's name and calling out to him. They came a little closer to him asking what happened to him. Sang-mook was without strength. They said his strong arms that had replaced his weapons were now reduced to pathetic knots. The guys were masked. Staring intently at Sang-mook, they said he was sent here to kill some drug-addicted mutt. Sang-mook looked at them without saying anything. Before that, he came to Phoenix, who called out to him. She was sitting on the couch with smoke next to her. Sang-mook was behind her. She turned her head to him and asked him if he supported the Lespedesia brothers. She asked with a smirk that he had come to kill her. He looked at her in surprise. Phoenix stood up and walked towards him, saying that she had something more interesting for him than her death. She walked up to him, showed him the blue flowers in her hand and asked if he wanted to help her. Lespedesia's brothers said he had fallen for this broad. Let him look at himself already. They looked at him and said they warned him about women, while calling him brother. The guy said it wasn't the women's fault in any way. It was just that this particular individual was a dirty druggie. The other guy said loudly that he was back to his "it's not the women's fault" thing. They began to argue among themselves. One said that women are useless creatures, unable to take even the slightest weight in their hands. The other answered him that if it comes to legs, it's a different conversation. The police looked and listened without understanding what they were arguing about and why. Sang-mook asked the Lespedesia brothers what they were doing here. They asked him what kind of stupid questions he was asking. They said they were here to kill the thing and asked where it was. The light was shining brightly in the hallway. Kyungsoo was carrying a powerless phoenix on his back. She said quietly that it reminded her of the good old days. Kyungsoo told her to stop talking and save some strength to surrender to the police. The girl asked if he remembered the day they met each other. Kyungsoo remained silent. The day they first met, the boy was standing with a stick. Someone standing not far away called out to him. It was Mr. Buddha, who had his hand on the girl's shoulders. Bi Gwan turned to them. The Buddha said about the girl that she had made it. The girl stood and looked at the floor. She was worried. Buddha said that they would now work in an alliance and for him to show her around and help her get used to it. Bi Gwan looked at her silently. The stick hit the ground. There was a girl sitting on the floor on her knees, her stick lying next to her. Bi Gwan was standing in front of her with his stick in his hands and looking at the girl. He rudely asked how she managed to survive and get here, calling her weak. She looked down awkwardly. Bi Gwan wanted to ask again how she got here somehow, but the girl interrupted him and replied corpses, told that she woke up among the dead bodies of children and was the only survivor. Waking up, she covered her mouth with her hand with tears in her eyes. Bi Gwan said she wasn't skilled enough for this place. He said he was sorry. The girl shouted at him that she would do whatever she was told and asked him not to tell Mr. Buddha because she didn't want to die, all the while repeating that she didn't want to die. Bi Gwan looked at her and he felt sorry for her. He sat down in front of her and told her to get up and he would not tell anyone. The girl asked him if it was true. He said it was true. He said that after passing the test he made a promise that he would always keep his partner safe. The girl in tears repeated his word about the promise. She looked into his eyes and asked him if he promised her and put up her pinky finger. Bi Gwan asked why the pinky. She replied that her mom taught her that promises should be made with pinkies crossed. She continued to hold up her pinky and again asked if he would promise. He replied that he would. A hand reached out to her side and it was Mr. Buddha who reached out to her with a smile while she was on her knees on the floor. His men tried to force something from the bowl into her mouth that would kill her. Bi Gwan only turned away from the sight as she tried to get out. Then they poured poison into her mouth. they managed to get her to drink it. Remembering this, Phoenix said that she knew he didn't keep his promise while at this time he further carried her on his back. She went on to say that in the end how could both protect her and survive in such conditions herself. Recalling Buddha's appearance, she said that she should have put all the blame on someone who really deserved it, and she just started blaming him for it. Kyungsoo replied that she had it all wrong, saying that he didn't break his promise to save her from death. Phoenix looked at him questioningly, asking what he was talking about. Without turning his gaze on her, he asked that they still never realized why she was the only survivor back then. Phoenix was surprised by his words and asked what he was talking about. The guy was holding onto his sore arm while Sang-mook was screaming in pain. He looked at her and said that he had become very thin. He yelled for them to stop him. The policeman grabbed the shields that were on the floor. They raised them in front of them and ran forward shouting. Suddenly they stopped and looked at one point. One of the Lesbian brothers swung his foot at them. They tried to hold on to their shields. His kick on the shield caused it to bend. The policemen fell on their backs. Another of the brothers told He to sit quietly as they were getting rid of the traitor. The guy squeezed Sang-mook's sore hand even more and said he used to be admired. Sang-mook stuck his hand into his pants pocket. He pulled out a single band-aid from there. The guy asked if he was going to keep on drugging himself until the end. Not to be disappointed, he said he should glue it on. Sang-mook wanted to glue despite his words. The guy told him that they would see where the path would take him. He put a band-aid on his throat with the words that the only person he was afraid to disappoint. He swung his fist, screaming that it was a mess. Phoenix, he punched him. Next to him on the floor sat He, with the second brother of the lesbian standing beside her. He saw blood splattered in front of her. The guy was standing with a bloody fist, telling Sang-mook that this road was leading him to the dumpster. They turned to the police guys and said it was their turn, looked at them with crazy eyes. In front of them were the scared 3 policemen and Ah-hyun, who wasn't paying attention to anything. Looking around them, said with a smile that there were so many mouthy losers in front of them. They looked at the guys. With a sneer they said that there were so many appetizing losers in front of them. The guys didn't understand what they meant. He asked about the appetizing ones. The guy said he didn't mean him. He said he doesn't eat women, and men have pretty good bodies. He told the guys not to try to hide their bodies under a suit. He pointed his finger at Sung-hyun, who looked at him surprised, asking him what sport he's been doing and for how long. Sung-min said he's been boxing for over 10 years. He asked why he was answering him. He shouted at the guy and called him an idiot. The guy standing next to him started clapping his hands and said it was excellent. Looking at them said he loved his beautiful body. He also pointed his finger at Sung-hyun, who raised his hands without realizing what was being asked of him. While he shouted at him not to answer. She was saying why talk to psychopaths. Jun told her to keep quiet and one of the guys noticed the girl. He paid attention to her. Said that now he can get a good look at this woman. She's gorgeous. He started to say no, showing a cross with her hands. And Hen sat silently looking at the floor. He said she has a beautiful body. Suddenly he ran at her. He quickly reached out his hand towards her, grabbed her throat. He was beating his fists and screaming for him to let her go. The other one grabbed Sung-hyun. She yelled at Jun in pain that this guy was very strong. The guy was holding Ah-hyun by the throat. Sung-min lay his head on the floor while his hands were held behind his back. One guy opened his mouth first, then so did the other, saying thank you for lunch. In the bright hallway, conversations could be heard. Kyungsoo was carrying Phoenix on his back. She was asking what it meant. She wasn't just one of the survivors back then. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She said that she must have just had a drug resistance. Kyungsoo replied that when they became partners, he realized something. Little Phoenix was sitting on the ground with her stick lying beside her. She looked tired, but no matter how much effort she put in, will still die at the hands of that bastard, meaning Mr. Buddha. Bi Gwan looked sad. He was standing on the street with a stick in his hands. A voice nearby asked if he was worried about this little one. He directed his gaze towards the person who spoke to him. It was a man in a black suit with long hair. Bi Gwan cracked the stick against his knee. Anger appeared in his eyes and he ran from his seat. He was going to stab the guy in the stomach with one end, but he managed to get the end of the stick in his hand. He held the sharp broken end in front of his face and told Bi Gwan to calm down. Even though he had been chosen as the next head, Bi Gwan continued to make an effort to hit him with the stick and pressed on it. The man slapped his hand on the side of his neck and said he was still a child. Bi Gwan fell to his knees. The guy said he would tell him how to save the girl from dying. He asked what he was talking about. The guy said he knew what kind of poison was used to create the syak. If she started taking the poison, gradually increasing the dose, she would soon develop resistance to the poison. Bi Gwan looked at him with an angry look and asked him what he wanted. he told him that he was a smart kid, and he was not wrong in his decision to let him live. He made a deal with the first generation Bi Gwan, and that was how he got to the list of poisonous herbs. Bi Gwan held out a bowl that had food in it and told him to eat this. Phoenix was glad it was rice. She started to eat but felt something strange, turned to Bi Gwan and said it tasted bitter. The guy awkwardly turned away and said she was just imagining it. He added them to the food, and years later, she managed to survive the moment she was forced to drink the poison. He carried her on his back down the hallway and said that now they had met again. Phoenix said quietly that he was lying. He reminded her how she had been lying with a fever and suffering from rashes all over her body. It was her body building up immunity then. She asked why he hadn't told her before. He said that if he had, she would have blabbed on drugs and they'd both be finished. And that bastard monk thought she was born drug-resistant like the first-generation Phoenix, Sanpai. So he got her on drugs to raise a new Phoenix when he told her to eat all the pills on the table. And Bi Gwan planned a secret escape. Without saying anything to the members of Hwaguxa, headed to her place to take her away with him. After sneaking into her room at night, he opened the door and started to wake her up. He stood over her bed. The girl struggled to say, "Bi Gwan, brother, is it?" He started to say that before they knew, but his look changed immediately. The girl stood up a little. It was obvious from her expression and demeanor that she was drugged. She told him with a smile on her face to leave. "This is heaven." Then he realized that he was terribly mistaken. She asked what was wrong and if he wanted to go for a walk with her. There were various pills and a syringe on the floor next to the bed. She held out her hands to him and told him to stay here, as she had something better to do and this fucking thing had changed her forever. He regretted his actions when he saw her start to become different and wondered if he should have just left her for dead that day. While on his back, she asked why he didn't run away alone. He only replied, "Who knows?" Suddenly they heard a scream and stopped. The screams were coming from a closed door. The girl said angrily that it was probably Sang Mook's doing. "We must hurry to him." They rushed into their room, the girl yelling for Jo Sang Mook to stop. Suddenly, they stopped in surprise. The guy was biting the policeman's hand. They saw the brothers Lespedetsa Grizzly, the policeman, and Jen. He tried to pull them away, but then she screamed Kyungsoo's name when she saw him. Phoenix was surprised to realize that it was a Lespedisia. Kyungsoo said that it was not good. One of them opened its mouth wide, which was covered in human blood. The other one also started screaming. There were two brothers. The older one was born with weak legs, and the younger one was born with flaccid arms. These defects were the brothers' main weakness, and it was because of this that they were abandoned. The brothers were shut up in the hunger room where children with physical ailments were sent. The brothers could not accept the fact that they would have to die for being born with such handicaps, so the boys decided to defy fate. They practiced, killed each other, devoured each other, biting off each other's flesh. They practiced in the hunger room again, killing again, and devoured. The brothers did it over and over again. They still played sports as much as possible, fighting amongst themselves, devouring, and in time they became stronger. After a few months, the Buddha opened the door to their room. They decided to let them live. The boys covered their faces with their hands because of the light they hadn't seen in a very long time. Their bodies were already strong at that point, but after years of training, the older one had managed to train his legs and become stronger than a boar. And the younger brother, who had weak arms, trained his shoulders like the wings of a bird. They told each other it was great, even wonderful. Calling the brother a black Lespedisia shocked the Lespedisia brothers, who achieved physical strength. The Lespedisia brothers saw Phoenix sitting on Kyungsoo's back. One of them asked what she was doing. While calling her a drug addict, they said she flew up on the cop's back. Phoenix threw an aggressive look at them. She saw a dead Sang Mook lying on the floor in a pool of blood, shouted his name. One of the brothers said that he had waited for this day for a very long time and that he despised people making a big deal out of themselves just because they belonged to the top of you. The girl looked at him with anger. He continued that such people show off as if they mean something, when in fact they are just carcasses. Said that Bi Gwan is dead, so if she dies, January heron, March cherry, August mountain, only they will remain. The second brother asked him if they could keep the cherry tree. "It's cute." He didn't say anything. Kyungsoo thought to himself that you was only trouble, but only two people can work together at the top. Kyungsoo shouted from the balcony to Jen, he asking if she had called for backup, to which she said yes and they would be there within 10 minutes. He started to lead Phoenix holding his back. He realized that 10 minutes would be able to resist them. The brothers looked at them. Suddenly Kyungsoo looked at them and saw them blurred. Their bodies were in different directions. He didn't realize what was happening to his body. Suddenly, drug streaks appeared on his face. He decided that maybe the drugs had gotten into him through MS. Phoenix's blood and caused him to have this reaction. She cried and said she wasn't going anywhere unless he carried her on his back, so he had to. Phoenix looked at him and said there was something wrong with his body. He was going limp and it wasn't good. One of his brothers jumped onto the balcony to him. He took him with his strong hands on his head. The boy didn't expect it. He broke out of his grip and didn't realize where he'd gone. Kyungsoo was not far away from the floor. He kicked him from underneath the leg of one of the brothers. The one said that he couldn't knock him down. He put his two hands into one fist and swung at him. He brought them down sharply, saying that such a pathetic attempt. Kyungsoo was quick to react. He didn't have time to hit him while his hands were in the air. Kyungsoo managed to dodge. He called him a rat. He looked at Kyungsoo, who was standing not far away, and said that he seemed to have gotten bigger. Kyungsoo replied that it made him not so agile anymore. The guy looked at him questioningly. He asked if he knew anything about him, but Kyungsoo realized that his strength was failing him. He called out to Phoenix, who was sitting on the floor, telling her to follow the police officers and he would join them soon. Shouted to Jen he to gather the kids and other squad members and get out of here. Jen he said well and that she would leave. Lespadetsa's brother stood with his arms crossed on his chest. He wasn't very happy about it. Kyungsoo realized that he didn't have much time left and needed to finish soon. He started running at the guy. The one with the fist said it was manly and he liked it. He missed with the punch as Kyungsoo managed to duck down. Kyungsoo was about to punch him in the stomach, but then his brother Lespadesia's hand appeared in front of his face. He elbowed him in the face. Kyungsoo's cheek bled. Phoenix looked at all of this with an anxious look because of the fact that he realized that he was keeping up with brother Bi Gwan. She had always been a burden. Remembering the moment where she sat on the ground without strength, Phoenix felt like bursting into tears. She put her head down and slipped her hand into the inside pocket of her jacket, pulled out a small star-shaped vial of blue liquid from there and said that this was the end. The guy was telling Kyungsoo, who was becoming increasingly powerless, that he was slowing down. His body wasn't bad, but in a terrible state. He stood in front of Kyungsoo and said that it was stuffed with drugs so it couldn't even be eaten. He pointed his fist at him and said goodbye. The light from the bulb on the ceiling was burning. The guy's look changed to a frightened one. His fist was stopped by Phoenix. She stood in front of him and apologized to her little brother. The empty vial was lying on the floor. She said she probably couldn't turn herself in to the police, but before she could finish, the guy yelled at her to get out of the way. Phoenix's eyes were blue in color and her hair was light white. She gathered her strength and said that this time it would be him who would be saved. Mrs. Phoenix's drugs have several stages. Buddhist tears made by the previous Miss Phoenix Pi and San Pi, and their improved version Quan, also known as light. Depending on the stage, the patches can increase pleasure levels and physical abilities, but when the drug runs out, there is a high risk of the opposite effect. The light patches were the strongest. They were so powerful that they easily clouded Sanpai's mind. However, there was a higher level that few people knew about. Phoenix, noticing that she had developed a resistance to the light patches, began to try harder to achieve a stronger concentration, hence the name Phoenix's Tear. Phoenix decided to drink it when the light patches stopped working. When the critical moment came, she knew the drug was safe, because she had put it in a strong glass vial, and if she drank it, all hell would break loose. A fierce Phoenix holding a massive man's hand, her hair waving in different directions. One of the Lespadesia brothers turned around questioningly. He started swinging at Phoenix, who looked many times smaller than him, and yelled at her to get her filthy hands off. She hit him first. The guy coughed from the blow. Phoenix stood up, and the guy backed away like he'd gotten it, staring at her with an angry look. He lowered his gaze down and looked at his hand with shock. Phoenix was looking at him with anger, and Kyungsoo was standing behind him. The guy turned red with anger and yelled about her being a dirty drug addict. He looked at his hands and yelled about having a clean body, and Phoenix turned to Kyungsoo calling him bro. They began to whisper. She listened to him intently. The guy started yelling and asking them what they were whispering about and how dare they defile his pure body. Phoenix turned her head slightly in his direction and said she thought so. Phoenix teasingly told him he was doing pretty good and asked if he was dabbling in drugs too. The guy was shocked and could only ask a simple what. The guy was ready, yelling for her to take it back, calling her a stinking junkie, trying to prove that he was holding on by sheer fortitude. Phoenix was alarmed when she saw him take a swing at her and yell at her. He swung at her and punched her in the stomach, yelling about how he was the healthiest. The girl was bleeding from her mouth. She fell to her knees and the guy was telling her to die, calling her a dirty drug addict. She kneeled on the floor with her head down, closed her eyes for a while, raised her head and started spitting blood in his face. The guy's mask got dirty. He screamed and grabbed his eyes with his hands, screaming about how dirty she was. she jumped out at the guy's neck, breaking his arm and kicking his neck with her legs to immobilize him. She managed to get him on the floor, and the guy kept reminding her that she was a dirty bitch. Phoenix started calling the cops. She yelled at them to get their comrades and get out of here. One cop wondered why she was helping them. He asked if it mattered now. She yelled for them to hurry up and get Kyungsoo, the commander, and the guys out of here. The second masked brother came in and said that no one was getting out of here. The police looked at him. He showed her displeasure, then lowered his gaze. She saw the patches under her leg, looked at them in surprise. There were screams from the guy in the room. He was trying to get Phoenix off of him, yelling for her to get off of him. Phoenix resisted with all her might and the guy kept calling her a dirty bitch. The guy who came in asked if he could help. The guy asked him to unhook Phoenix from him. The guy told him to wait a while. He said he had to deal with those cops heading in their direction first. The guy was surprised. The cop appeared to be wearing a band-aid. She said with a slightly drunken look that it felt good. The guy was surprised that the cop was drugged. He said with a shocked look that she was crazy. She started running past him and put a band-aid on his leg. He didn't immediately realize what to do about it. He bent to his knee and started screaming. While he was trying to peel the band-aid off and yelling that it was dirt, he started yelling to Lee Sung-hyun to get Kyungsoo and Hwang Hee-jun to take care of the guys. The police officers immediately oriented themselves. They also grabbed the kids who were lying there under the influence of drugs. They quickly started running away from their screaming. The policeman was telling Kyungsoo to hold on and that the doctors would be there soon. Kyungsoo was losing consciousness. He turned his gaze to Phoenix. She was still holding the guy in the mask. She turned and smiled and said hello, calling him Appa. He kept calling for his brother. The guy was screaming to get the filthy thing off of him, and the other couldn't help as he was busy with his knee in a band-aid. The guy tried to put his hand between his neck and Phoenix's leg. He did manage it, to which Phoenix said oh shit. She freaked out. The guy called her a bitch and swung his fist in her face, screaming about being a bitch. He swung his fist up and hit her harder in the face, still screaming that she was a bitch. He threw her off of him and grabbed his face, trying to catch his breath. The other guy finally got the band-aid off and was saying he was going to find that red rat and kill her. He turned around. Phoenix asked where he was going and threw smoke bombs in his direction. Blue smoke appeared around him. He covered his face with his elbow. The whole room was filled with blue-colored smoke. The boy tried to look up. His brother was holding his hand to his throat. Phoenix said they would have to fight her to the end. She wiped the blood from her lips, saying it was over so they would die together. They were all drug addicts here after all. One rainy late night, Bi Gwan's little brother came to the not yet grown-up Phoenix, who was sleeping in a cave in the hay. He told her it was the day he first killed a man. She knew about it. She had heard that he had killed old Bi Gwan and officially joined the ranks of you. He put his hand near his solar plexus and said he had a strange feeling. Tears rolled down his cheeks and said he felt like he was missing something. He asked the girl if she had ever killed, to which she replied of course not. The girl looked at him with a pitying look. He held out his little finger to her and asked her to promise to stay that way. She agreed and their little fingers crossed, thus making the promise. After that day, Bi Gwan, who officially became you, successfully took down many other assassins, but he failed to lay a finger on the civilians, and Mr. Buddha tortured him. However, Bi Gwan was too skillful to die at the hand of the Lord, and when Phoenix entered Yu's ranks to please the Lord, at her will, multitudes of people wallowed in drugs and fell into the abyss of despair. She didn't feel an ounce of regret for her broken promise and comforted herself that he hadn't kept his word either. But when she remembered how he had given her poisoned rice to keep her alive, she realized she was wrong. Phoenix was killing people in front of Bi Gwan. She hated him, realizing she was wrong then. One of the Lesbian brothers punched Phoenix in the stomach while the other brother jumped over the handrail to them, a few band-aids flying around. He pulled his hands toward Phoenix's face. Taking her by the hair, he punched her in the face from his knee. She threw her head back from the blow. Her nose was bleeding. She asked herself why she had changed so much. The drugs that were still flying in the air above them now. It's all the drugs' fault. I remembered Bi Gwan's brother carrying her on his back. Reincarnation, thanks to Buddha. They say if a person sinned in a past life, they'll be reborn as insects or cattle, and only after you're rid of your sins can you be born a human being. Brother Bi Gwan retained his humanity and was born human, maybe to atone for his one sin. Then in his next life, Phoenix will be an insect or a cattle, or will end up in this hell again, meaning Mr. Buddha's temple. Phoenix was lying on the floor, being looked at by the Lispedet's brothers who were standing nearby. One of them asked that she must be coming off the drugs as she didn't seem to be feeling well. The other said that they must have gone a little overboard. Suddenly Phoenix spoke up about the drugs and they looked at her again. She held her hand out to them and asked them to give them more. The guys started laughing at her, saying she was on a roll and asking for more, calling her a rotter. He put his hand on the floor to take a band-aid and asked her what she wanted to get more on her face before she died. The girl raised her head slightly to see what he was holding out his hand for. He approached her with the band-aid in his hand and told her to take back what she said about them being junkies and then as a parting gift give her some. He yelled for her to say it. Phoenix said they were right and asked if they would give drugs. One of the brothers said of course. She held out her hand with the words about the drugs. Suddenly her look changed. She remembered her promise to her brother Bi Gwan, who asked her to stay like this, when he tearfully held her hand. When they crossed their little fingers, Phoenix had tears rolling down her eyes. The guys looked at her. She realized she was going to die. She addressed them as dependent carcasses and told them not to play innocent. They were no better than her after all and showed them her middle finger with a smile on her face. The guys were furious, but she realized she'd die better sober. He was about to hit her with his fist, but she put hers up to stop him from doing it. He leaned over her and started swinging at her, with the words that they weren't addicts. He punched her in the face. Phoenix thought to herself that before she died, if she could with all her heart, apologize to all the people whose lives she ruined. With those thoughts she was getting punched, screaming that she was a fucking mutt, even if she doesn't get reborn as Bi Gwan's brother. The guy with rabid fury in his eyes was saying she was a piece of dog shit. He was choking her, but she didn't even try to break free. She only said quietly with tired eyes that she was sorry and she was wrong. Insect or beast, it was all the same. No need to be born human at all. She said that she didn't even want to be reborn. Remembering the Buddha temple building, asked that just to not be there again. She lay screaming about it, the man's hands still on her throat choking her. He asked what she was chalking up, calling her an addicted idiot. As he sat over her and choked her, his brother stood nearby. He took his hands off her throat, looked at them and said with a sneer that he dirted her whole body. Told Han it was time to go. He asked what he was going to chase the cops in this condition. He said he had a couple of unfinished business. His brother said their backup must be waiting around the corner by now. He said he didn't care about them because he'd just killed them all and asked if he was scared now that he remembered them. Hen said he was a little scared. He said with surprise that they weren't done with the redhead yet. Hen asked if he'd trained his hands so much that the twists had gotten hurt. They didn't even know how many there were. He turned away and said he'd go himself. Hen quietly agreed and decided he'd have to follow him anyway. Suddenly he saw something. He was holding a small flower with blue petals in his hand. Hyun asked if Miss Phoenix was done. He said they were just leaving the scene and headed for the exit. The backup is close. They are already climbing the mountain. The brothers remembered the words of Buddha, who told them that they would find gasoline in the warehouse. They should burn all the drugs before the police came, and run out the back door. He had to tell them the coordinates. The guy asked his brother why he commanded, to which he replied that it was the order of Mr. Buddha, so they would have to obey. They were all in the same room. They looked at Phoenix's body. They put band-aids on her dead body and said it would be the most elaborate funeral ever for a junkie. One of them said they wished they could take her body and feed it to Peony the mutt. Hen replied that Peony would get mad if he fed the dog garbage. There was a big fire in the room they were in. They watched Phoenix's body burn along with the drugs. Hen said fire is always nice to watch. His brother called him to hurry up. He doesn't want to turn into a kebab. They walked towards the exit with the fire burning behind them. As the drugs burned away, they said goodbye to Phoenix, calling her a bitch. Kyungsoo jumped out of bed. He was in the hospital. Put his hand to his head in pain. He heard a bird chirping. Looked out the window. There was a small bird sitting on a tree branch. He looked at it carefully. The bird turned its head towards him with a stare. Operation Phoenix at the top of the Polonia tree. The burning drug patch that reminded him that Phoenix was no more. This operation was complete. In her hand was a drawing card. Buddha looked at it intently. He clenched it in his fist and pieces flew off of it. He called for the May orchid. There were orchid flowers in a vase on the table. Asked her to gather them all. January through October. Said the Buddhist ceremony was about to begin. He was in the same hospital as Kyungsoo. She was sitting in the bed and curved her face in jest, waving her hands and saying something slurred. The nurse next to her was laughing with her. Kyungsoo was standing behind her saying she was crazy. He turned his head back as someone called out to him. It was the general, asking if he was alright with her if they could talk in private. Kyungsoo looked at him with a serious face. They came to a private room. Sitting at the table, Kyungsoo asked how long he had been unconscious, to which the general replied 2 days. Kyungsoo immediately asked if Phoenix had died. The general confirmed what he said. Kyungsoo said that they should have gotten the information while she was alive. But she died. With a sad look, he looked down. the general said while he was unconscious. Regarding the plan, a debate raged about the overuse of real bullets, and, conversely, the fairness of the action. It was a war of public opinion. Special forces died there. Then what excessive use are we talking about? In politics there are always two camps. If party A is for the circle, then B is for the triangle. And vice versa. If B is for the circle, then party A will support the triangle. Kyungsoo said that it made his head spin, but the general was going to say something else. Lt. Colonel Kim Hyun, who participated in the operation, and Patrolman Hwang Hee-jun and Lee Sung-hyun, folding their hands on the table together, said that they wanted to resign. Kyungsoo didn't expect this. The general said he tried to change their minds. Kyungsoo put his hand on his face and said that they only give them problems. The general got up from his chair, took his headgear, said that of course this is all important news. Putting on his police cap, said he had somewhere to go with him and talk about the rest later. Kyungsoo asked where exactly. He answered that it was to the funeral of the dead SWAT officers. Kyungsoo said he had never been to a funeral. The general said he could just put on his police uniform. He looked at the general and said he had somewhere to go first. 2. It's quick. Hwaguksa Temple. Inside stood a golden-colored Buddha statue. All the monks' men were in one room. January. The pine tree is missing. The girl, nicknamed February. Plum said that Pine didn't come again. As usual. March. Sakura said he thought everyone was a bum, but she had a lot to do. April. Fuji asked what she was doing being so businesslike. Maze. Iris said to cover her mouth. Asked if she should wear a muzzle otherwise. June. Peony stroked her dog who was barking. Said no need as they don't bite. July. Lespadija thought about having to call Sakura for a date after the service. August. Miscanthus absent. September. Chrysanthemum asked when the monk was coming. October. Maple said he was dead, but immediately forwarded that it looked like he was dead. The doors opened. The light from the other side came into their room. Everyone was sitting on the floor kneeling in front of a masked Buddha statue. The monk asked if everyone was gathered. The guy nicknamed October Maple replied that January Pine and August Miscanthus had not come. Monk said Maple was cleaning up the trail now. In the clubhouse, which was lit up with purple light, lay many corpses of guys with phoenix masks. February. Plum asked what about January. Monk replied that January was without comment. April asked what that stuff was. Sakura said she actually came. Monk asked if they knew about Phoenix being dead. February said she was being stupid. Sakura with fan in hand replied that drug addicts are all like that. Sakura turned to the monk and asked that they had gathered to choose November and December. The monk said that wasn't why. He said he called because one of them, showing a photo, he said that someone should kill Police Chief Hong Jun. One of the guys looked at the photo and asked if it was this creep. September said that if that was the case, it would be better to send not them, but the guys that the monk was training. They would be fine. May agreed with him, saying that it wasn't even a big shot, but some old cop boss. The monk replied that he'd sent Bi Gwan to Hong Jun once before. September replied that Bi Gwan had good skills, but he wasn't a hitman, so he didn't kill him. July added that he had lost his qualifications as a hitman, but now something's different. Bi Gwan came back covered in blood. Monk looked at him listening to his situation. He said the bastard was too strong. June asked about what he said that he was too strong. Could this pathetic cop be so strong? July also said that from one photo it was obvious that he was weak. Monk continued to keep the general's photo open. April was surprised. He said it couldn't be and Bi Gwan must have just failed. May turned to him and asked him what he thought. Would he have driven himself to such a point? The monk said he couldn't believe it either, but it was better to be careful. He didn't kill him then. He just made sure he didn't track them down. Everyone listened to him carefully. He said that this general was now back on their trail, so now they would find out what he was capable of. So he asked who would go. One side listened attentively. The other side of the guys were also scrutinizing him. He asked who would go and kill him. The general sat in the hall with the rest of the cops and shivered, asking what the chills were.